Chapter 167. In Yangxin Palace Hall, a bowl was placed in front of the Empress. There were medicinal herbs and other things in it. It was emitting a very strong bitter smell. Just a whiff of it would make one frown. The bitterness of a single ingredient in this medicinal cuisine was enough to cover up all the other flavors. Thus, no matter what was done, only bitterness would be emitted in the end. After drinking a bowl of medicinal cuisine, the Empress's face turned slightly red. Her stomach felt as though it was on fire, giving off a scorching sensation. After a while, the warmth began to spread throughout her body. The Empress opened her eyes, took the candy from Hong Luan, and put it in her mouth. "Let him in," the Empress said coldly. After a while, Feng Ho quickly entered the hall and bowed. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Let's see." The Empress used two of her fingers to pick up a piece of paper that was placed at the side. She transformed into a white line and flew in front of Feng Ho before she suddenly slowed down and was caught by him. Feng Ho lowered his head and looked at the contents of the paper. It was a report on the mining situation of Mount Damo after it had cooled down. "It's actually possible," Feng Ho exclaimed after seeing the results. Just this alone was enough to increase the production by 2 or 3 times. If 2 or even 3 locations were to take turns burning the mountain and more people were sent to mine, the production could increase by 4 or 5 times. The daily output of 400 to 500 kilograms of iron ore was enough to forge more than 15 weapons. In a year it would be around 5,000 weapons. In 2 years, it would be 10,000 weapons. For the current Dayo, it would be able to solve its urgent need. In this way, only half of the weapons for the new army of 20,000 were left. Apart from using part of the iron ores in Mount Liutsue for civilian use, some of it could also be used to forge weapons. In this way the shortfall would be even smaller. Through some clans in the Yun Nation and the Qin Nation, they would be able to make up for most of the remaining iron ores. The real shortfall would not be much. "Congratulations, Your Majesty. It is truly fortunate to have such a good thing at such a time. Deputy Prefect Ren has made a great contribution this time. I will request for a reward for Deputy Prefect Ren," Feng Ho said with a delighted look on his face. Ren Baqian had actually increased the output of Mount Damo's iron ore by so much. This was really beyond his expectations. That Deputy Prefect Ren seemed to have some ideas. In that case, even if he came to the Department of Ordnance to stir things up, he wouldn't be able to make any suggestions. "It's good that you are aware of this matter. I will issue an order to mobilize manpower to cut down the trees and transport the materials. You will be in charge of the arrangements. Don't delay this matter or else you will be severely punished," the Empress said coldly. "This subject obeys," Feng Ho replied. After Feng Ho left, the Empress said, "Call Hong Bao over." After a while, Hong Bao carried a cloth bag and walked into Yangxin Palace Hall with large strides. He knelt down on one knee and said, "Your Majesty, fortunately, I did not fail you." At the same time he opened the package to reveal a box. It was filled with lime powder and a human head. "Clean it and present it to me." After the Empress finished speaking, someone immediately carried the box away. A moment later, the head was presented to the Empress. The Empress took a closer look at the head. The face of the corpse was very ugly, but it indeed looked exactly like that person. Immediately, she felt an indescribable sense of irritation in her heart. She waved her hand and said, "Take it away and deal with it." "Hong Bao, tell me the details," the Empress asked again. "I followed him all the way to Great Xia, and after confirming his route, I waited for him at the Severing Dragon platform." After listening to Hong Bao, the Empress calculated the time and realized that the 7th prince's death happened to be the evening before she was brought to that world by Ren Baqian. This time around 50 winged cavalry warriors followed Ren Baqian, Ting Ji and Tao Jiyuan into the Mount Liutsue iron mine. There were a total of 53 winged cavalry warriors including Ren Baqian, Ting Ji and Tao Jiyuan. At this moment, most of the winged cavalry warriors had already dispersed. Some of them continued to look for prey in the surrounding areas. After all, a flower eagle wasn't enough for everyone. Ren Baqian found a place to sit and rest. He was rubbing a cloud crystal in his hand. This was his big harvest from this trip. At this moment, Ren Baqian heard a mournful cry in the sky. The sound was so sharp that it seemed to pierce through one's eardrums. "It's here." Ting Ji, who was stabbed into the ground, stood up and looked into the sky. "What's here?" Ren Baqian raised his head and saw a small black dot circling in the sky. The mournful cry came from this small dot that was circling in the sky. Flower eagles usually travel in pairs. If one dies, the other won't survive alone. That flower eagle has found its way here. Ting Ji said while caressing his long saber. He didn't look nervous at all. If the flower eagle didn't launch a sudden attack, it wouldn't pose too much of a threat. In fact, a flower eagle wasn't considered a powerful creature in the 60,000 mountains. It was just relatively rare and difficult to catch. Some of the surrounding people raised their heads to take a look. Following which, they continued to busy themselves with the things on hand. Evidently, they didn't care much about it. When Rinpoche heard Tingji's words, he felt that it was a pity. This kind of animal that was dead while the other wasn't alive was still very touching. It was especially easy to have a good impression of it. This was especially so for young men and women. Chirp. Another mournful cry sounded in the sky. That flower eagle is descending. Rinpoche felt that the flower eagle seemed to have become bigger. Very quickly Rinpoche confirmed his thoughts. That flower eagle was indeed getting bigger. When it was about 200 to 300 meters in the sky, Rinpoche could already feel the power of that flower eagle. Following which, that flower eagle circled in the sky once again. Following which, it ferociously charged in the direction of Rinpoche, Tingji and the rest. That's right, it simply didn't think of leaving this place alive. It only continued to accelerate and carried its entire body weight as it crashed down from the sky. "Sir, don't move," Tingji said. When that flower eagle transformed into a brown silhouette in the sky, Tingji leaped 7 to 8 meters into the sky with his saber. With a crash, a rain of blood fell from the sky. 2 pieces of a corpse with internal organs and blood sprinkled down from the sky. "If I don't move, I will be drenched in blood again." Rinpoche knew what Tingji was going to do when he saw his actions. He broke into a run and ran to the side. Even though that flower eagle was crashing over at a slanted angle, it was still going vertically downwards. According to the current situation, when Tingji chopped the flower eagle apart, it happened to be on top of his head. This point could also be seen from Tingji's almost vertical leap. However, Rinpoche, who had run 4 to 5 steps away, turned his head and saw that half of the flower eagle's body whizzing towards him. He immediately cursed, "Damn you." If he had stood at his original position, nothing would have happened. However, he ran a few steps to the side. However, that half of the flower eagle's body with its wings just happened to split into 2 before crashing down. "Sir, be careful." When the winged cavalry warriors at the side saw this scene, they were shocked. This flower eagle flew down at an extremely fast speed. Even though it was chopped into 2, the force of the falling half of its body wasn't small. If it was someone else, it would still be fine. However, if it was Rinpoche, at the very least, his bones would be broken. A few of the winged cavalry warriors leaped up and pounced towards where Rinpoche was standing. One of them leaped into the air and kicked the falling flower eagle's body. Blood immediately blossomed. That part of the flower eagle's flesh was directly smashed by his kick, but half of its body was also sent flying to the side. Phew! Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. "Thank you, brother." Rinpoche wiped the blood off his face and thanked that winged cavalry warrior. He then hurriedly ran to wash his hair and face. When he came back, the flower eagle's stomach had already been cut open. "Is there any?" Rinpoche asked anxiously. "No, there are only ordinary gravel." Everyone knew what he was asking and immediately showed him the thing that they took out from the flower eagle's stomach. It was just a handful of very small gravel. Things like cloud crystals could only be encountered and not sought. Chapter 168. He had to admit that the flower eagle's meat was indeed fresh and tender. Furthermore, it was roasted over a fire, and its fragrance assailed his nostrils. He felt warm all over after eating it. It was said that the flower eagle's meat was very nutritious. It was a pity that the 2 flower eagles could only be eaten by everyone. Otherwise, Rinpoche would have kept 1 piece and stored it in the fridge on Earth for future consumption. Outside the mountain, everyone found a small town to rest for a day. Rinpoche then made use of this time to return to Earth. First, he asked the physics expert about the progress of the solar furnace. The small one that could melt a small piece of iron in a short period of time was already halfway done and would be ready in a few days. Rinpoche was relieved after confirming that he would be able to get it after returning to Lan City. He then drove straight home. It had been 4 to 5 months since he last went home. He didn't even go back for the new year, so he had to go back to take a look. His home was still the same. The only change was that his father had bought a new car for 200,000 yuan, which was considered to have fulfilled his long-cherished wish. As for the rest of the money, it was still being saved by his parents. If Rinpoche was short of money in the future, he could take it out or save it for Wanyin's wedding. Who was that girl last time? Rinpoche accompanied his father to drink some white wine during the meal. After 2 glasses of wine, his father mentioned the girl in red that he saw that day again. Not only him but Mama Ren and Ren Wanyan also pricked up their ears. I have said that I am a business partner. I had something to discuss with you the last time. Don't think too much about it. If I have a girlfriend, I will bring her back. Rinpoche's face didn't change as he spouted nonsense. Rinpoche thought about how he was still an honest young man at this time last year. Now he could spout nonsense without batting an eyelid. Fate really made a fool out of people and public morals were degenerating day by day. After staying at home for 2 days, Rinpoche returned to his rented house and returned to the other world. Are you ready? Let's go. Rinpoche pushed open the door and said to everyone waiting outside. A few days later, Rinpoche looked at the lofty city wall that was getting closer and closer. He was finally back. This time he had been away for more than half a month. He basically ran around every day and could only rest when he returned to Earth. He was already tired. Furthermore, he somewhat missed that person in the palace. The winged cavalry warriors sandwiched the 2 carriages and entered the city. Rinpoche put down the curtain, leaned against the bumpy carriage and closed his eyes to rest. In a shop not far away, a person was looking at the winged cavalry and horse carriage entering the city in the middle of the road. After sizing them up for a long time, he went out and turned into an alley at the side. After making a few more turns, he finally arrived at a courtyard. The courtyard was silent. After he knocked a few times on the wall inside the door, a few young men with indifferent expressions walked out of the room. That person is back. The carriage has just entered the city. There are others? There's also a group of 100 Qi Zixiao's winged cavalry warriors guarding the left and right. He was protected by the winged cavalry when he came out this time, which shows how much Qi Zixiao values him. I don't know when he will come out of the palace again, and I'm afraid he won't come out alone. It's better to take a risk. In any case, there's no way we can return alive from this mission. Even if it's a risky move, I still need to be able to kill him. He's just an ordinary person. Even with the winged cavalry, our 4 repeating crossbows can turn him into a hedgehog in a split second. It's too hasty to chase after him now. Continue to monitor him and wait for the next time he comes out. Kill him in one shot. Finally, a person who had been silent all this while spoke up. The others nodded and didn't argue anymore. However, in this unfamiliar city, especially when the surrounding people were mostly different from them, it was indeed difficult to keep an eye on the other party without being suspected. As for life and death, they were all men of sacrifice and didn't intend to return alive. All they wanted was to drag the target down with them. When the convoy stopped in front of the palace, Rinpoche got off the carriage and stretched his body. Then he saw the palace gates open and an imperial bodyguard shouted, Imperial Deputy Prefect Rinpoche, Director of the Ordnance Department Tao Jiuan, and Captain of the Winged Cavalry Ting Ji, please enter the palace for an audience. Rinpoche walked in the familiar palace with light footsteps. He had achieved half of his objectives this time and also brought a gift for the Empress at the same time. It wasn't too bad. The only bad thing was that he didn't know what the situation was. In the throne room, the Empress sat on the seat of honor and looked down at the few of them. She asked about the things that happened along the way and then waved her hand to let the other 2 leave. You saw the Bichi? The Empress frowned and looked at Rinpoche. Yes. Rinpoche nodded his head. This was what he said just now. It was better to say it himself than to let others say it. Looking at Tao Jiyuan's posture, it seemed to be quite serious. However, nothing happened during the past few days and Rinpoche was relieved. However, when the Empress asked him about it, his heart was in his throat again. Forget it, be more careful in the future. The Empress sighed and said, Follow me and tell me about the things that happened along the way. Rinpoche followed the Empress to the garden and sat down in the pavilion. Along the way, Rinpoche told her about the things that happened along the way. In fact, there wasn't much to talk about. He mentioned a few things about Mount Liutsue and wanted to hear what the Empress had to say about the thing in the belly of the mountain. After listening, the Empress played it down and said, In the past, there was a legend that there was a monster in there. The first emperor went there before but returned with serious injuries. Since then, the thing in there has been a taboo and I am not very clear about it. If there is a chance in the future, I would like to see what exactly it is. According to the legend, the thing in there has existed for at least 1,000 years. Rinpoche was speechless. There was actually something in there. It was really hard to imagine that it had existed for more than 1,000 years without dying. Could it be that something like the Kirin was in there? Rinpoche suddenly thought of a question that he had never asked before. He had never thought much about it before. However, if there was something in this world that had existed for more than 1,000 years, Rinpoche suddenly felt that the lifespan of the people in this world was very likely to be different from that of the people on Earth. At the thought of this, Rinpoche raised the question. The Empress looked at him in surprise and said, "You actually don't know? Ordinary aboriginals have a lifespan of about 70 to 90 years. If they cultivate to the Kismet heaven level, they can live for 120 to 140 years. If they cultivate to the cardinal heaven level, they can live for 180 to 200 years. After that, there is the longevity heaven level, and it is said that they can live for more than 300 years. The first generation emperor cultivated to the longevity heaven level, but he only reigned for 20 years before his whereabouts were unknown. Kismet heaven, cardinal heaven, and longevity heaven were actually the cultivation realms of the aboriginals. In front of them was the four-way heaven. As long as ordinary aboriginals reached adulthood and practiced a little, they could reach the four-way heaven level, which was equivalent to the man-wheel level. Compared to the great Xia practitioners, there was only one man-wheel expert out of 100. This was a huge advantage. Kismet heaven was equivalent to the earth wheel level to the heaven wheel level because the heaven wheel level was also known as the path to heaven. As the name suggested, if one couldn't make it, one would fall back to the peak of the earth embryo stage. The cardinal heaven level was equivalent to the spirit wheel level. As for the longevity heaven level, it was already a legendary level. It was said that Great Xia also had other levels above the spirit wheel level, but ordinary people didn't know about them. In fact, the aboriginals were much stronger than the practitioners from other countries at the same level. This was completely brought about by the strength of their bodies. Rinpoche had learned about these classifications from Lin Xiaola when he was learning Rui visualization, but he didn't expect that the lifespan of the aboriginals would be so much longer than that of the people on Earth. He originally thought that the aboriginals would at most live for about 100 years. Based on this calculation, Rinpoche was shuttling back and forth between the other world and the real world. Furthermore, the time period wasn't equal. If his body aged according to the time that he had experienced, if he lived for 60 years, only 40 years would have passed in the other world. If his Rui visualization couldn't increase his lifespan, wouldn't he already be old when the Empress was 60 years old? On the other hand, the Empress could at least live to about 180 years old. At this thought, Rinpoche's mood immediately turned sour. Chapter 169. 100 years for the Earth embryo realm and 150 years for the spirit wheel realm are just a rough estimate. There are also people who can live up to 160 years at the spirit wheel realm, the Empress casually said. She then looked at Rinpoche and asked, "Are you worried? I'm afraid that I won't be able to accompany your majesty for that long." Rinpoche looked at the Empress and smiled. The Empress remained silent for a while before replying, "I don't really understand your Rui visualization, but I don't think it's any weaker than the great Xia practitioners. When you reach the Earth embryo realm and have a good understanding of your own body, you'll be able to understand. Also, you don't have to think too much about it. Although there aren't many treasures in this world that can extend one's lifespan, there are still a few." Rinpoche didn't say anything else. Instead he asked, "But I see that all the officials in the imperial court are quite young." This was something that Rinpoche found rather strange. If Kismet heaven experts were 120 to 140 years old, then some of the court officials should have been around since the establishment of Dayo. But now, most of the people in the imperial court were no more than 40 or 50 years old. Only a few of the great elders and young elders were slightly older, but they were probably no more than 80 years old. They all left 50 years ago. The first emperor, all the officials and some of the soldiers who founded the nation, the Empress said. "Where did he go?" Rinpoche asked. "I don't know. No one knows. They guess that he might have entered the 60,000 mountains. If I can break through the longevity heaven, I will be able to find out where they went," the Empress said. Longevity heaven, Rinpoche thought. Longevity heaven could live up to 300 years, which was equivalent to 900 years on Earth. He didn't know how long he could live. However, it seemed that there was no need to be too pessimistic. Since he had to travel between the two worlds based on the calculation of 3 days in this world and 3 days on Earth, 6 days for him would be equivalent to 12 days on Earth. After 10 years, it would be 20 years on Earth. Technology would advance further, and there might even be new technologies that could extend one's lifespan. Another 30 years would be 60 years on Earth. At that time, it was hard to say how advanced technology would be. Perhaps when the time came, his lifespan would also increase by a few hundred years, or he might even be able to create another body. Therefore he did not need to think too much about it now. He just needed to cultivate hard and live well. However, when he was 43 years old, his younger brother, Wan Yin, was almost 60 years old. His parents were already in their 90s. That was a bit of a pity. He could only hope that Earth's technology would advance faster and become more developed. Your Majesty, I obtained this from Mount Liutsue. I have no use for it, so I wanted to bring it back for you. Ren Baqin took out a small bag and handed it to the Empress. The Empress was a little surprised when she took it and opened it. Inside was a slightly withered white flower. Below the flower was some fine sand that emitted 5 colors. When I saw this flower in the mountains that day, it was pure white and crystal clear. Although it was in the mountains, it stood out from the crowd. I felt that it must be very suitable for your Majesty. It's a pity that it has withered after being picked for so many days, Ren Baqin said with some regret. The corner of the Empress's mouth curled up. She took out the small white flower from the bag and looked at it. Then she sniffed it gently and glanced at him. She found it funny and said, I have this magnolia in my garden. Ren Baqin was astonished. I thought that this flower's outstanding charm would make her the king of flowers, which is very rare. However, a dozen meters in front of him, there was a white flower fluttering in the wind. The Empress didn't care about his little trick. She played with the small white flower for a while before putting it back into the bag. You are lucky to be able to find this cloud crystal, the Empress said. This fell from the sky. Ren Baqin laughed. Then he told the Empress about how the flower eagle swooped down from the sky and tried to catch him. In the end, Tingji cut open its abdomen and found this cloud crystal in its stomach. However, there was no need to talk about how his face was drenched in blood and internal organs. It was too disgusting. You better train well or else it will always be dangerous, the Empress said. Ren Baqin nodded. He knew that his strength had increased a little over these days. It was about 145 kilograms. The medicinal effects of the previous medicinal bath had been completely absorbed by him. Go back and train first. This trip was delayed. Otherwise, you would have had your 3rd medicinal bath soon. The Empress said, after training, accompany me for dinner at Jianghu Palace Hall. In that case, I will take my leave first. Ren Baqin stood up, cupped his hands and left. Not only did he want to take a medicinal bath, but he also wanted to keep those TNT explosives. The explosives that were originally prepared to be used in the mine were brought back by Ren Baqin. If it accidentally exploded, 40 kilograms of TNT would probably be able to flatten Pingle Park and the surrounding courtyards. There were 3 rooms in Pingle Park. Normally, 2 of them were occupied by a maid. However, Ren Baqin didn't have a maid, so those 2 rooms were always empty. His belongings had already been sent to his room. He went back to find the TNT explosives and placed them in the room next door. Then he called for someone to take a medicinal bath. After he finished cultivating in the medicinal bath, even though he was still tired, he felt much better than before. At least, he didn't feel like his body was hollowed out and he immediately went to bed. Looking at the time, Ren Baqin sat on a stool and took a nap. After about an hour, he realized that the surrounding sky was about to turn dark. He hurriedly rushed to Jianghu Palace Hall to look for the Empress. The Empress was leaning against the wooden couch and reading a book. Not far from the wooden couch was a table, a hot pot, as well as sliced meat and vegetables. Your Majesty, I am late, Ren Baqin said. It's all right. The Empress waved her hand. Soon after, Ren Baqin went forward to add the base ingredients to the hot pot and added some charcoal. Both of them ate the hot pot for a while. Ren Baqin looked at the Empress who was eating silently with her head lowered. He then thought of the figure dressed in red who was sitting on the sofa eating ice cream and watching the morning news while he was making breakfast. His heart stirred and he said, Your Majesty, do you still want to go to my world to take a look? This time was different from the previous time. Previously, he accidentally brought the Empress to that world, but this time, Ren Baqin took the initiative to invite her. The meaning was also different. This also meant that Ren Baqin didn't try to hide anything anymore. In fact, there was no need to hide anymore. The Empress had already been there, so what was the point of hiding? When the Empress heard what Ren Baqin said, she looked up at him and nodded slightly. Even though she looked calm on the surface, she was still somewhat happy after hearing what Ren Baqin said. And because of this, she looked even calmer on the surface. After eating the hot pot, the Empress called Xanjia over and gave her some instructions. I will be away for a day, don't worry. If anyone wants to see me, tell them that I am cultivating and won't see them. Your Majesty, it's better for me to follow you there, Xanjia quickly said. Chapter 170. On Earth, in the house that Ren Baqin had been renting, Two figures suddenly appeared out of thin air in the originally empty room. If someone were to see them, they would probably be scared to death. When the two of them came out from the palace, it was pitch black with only a faint light shining in from the window. This made Rinpoche immediately realize that it was already late at night. When he felt the hand that was holding his wrist loosen, he turned around and turned on the light switch. The light instantly turned on, making Rinpoche feel a little dazzled. At this moment, the Empress was wearing the red dress that she wore when she came back from here. She was wearing a pair of black flat-soled shoes, giving off a modern vibe. However, the hair that was coiled up on her head and the golden hairpin did not match her clothes. The Empress seemed to be aware of this problem. She reached out and removed the hairpin from her head, letting her hair fall down. Rinpoche looked at the time on the wall. It was 1:20 in the morning. At this time in Dayo it was only 8 o'clock. The two of them still needed to make up for the difference in time. 3 days here is equivalent to 1 day in Dayo, the Empress said as she looked at Rinpoche. The Empress looked at Rinpoche and said. She had already noticed this problem the last time she was in this world. That was because after staying in this world for 2.5 days, only 20 hours had passed since she returned. Rinpoche nodded his head. It's a good choice to train here, but this world is too dirty, the Empress said after thinking for a while. The last time she was here, she always felt that her nose was uncomfortable. If it wasn't for the fact that her physical fitness was too good, she would have gotten rhinitis in such an environment. Rinpoche spread out his hands and said, "This is the inevitable process of technological development. There are gains and losses. Perhaps after a few years, this world will return to its original state. It might be better or it might be worse. Who could say for sure what would happen in the future?" However, technology was advancing, and people's understanding of the environment had improved a lot. Rinpoche was still inclined to believe that the future would become better. "Your Majesty, take a rest first. I will bring you around tomorrow," Rinpoche said. The next morning Rinpoche woke up. Before him, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa with her legs curled up, watching the news. Other than some of Rinpoche's introductions, she obtained her knowledge of this world from the news. Rinpoche leaned against the wall and looked at the Empress, who was sitting on the sofa. There was a strange feeling in his heart. It was the feeling of a belated first love. Even though he was afraid of the Empress in the beginning and felt that she was dignified and indifferent, that feeling was getting lesser and lesser these days. Every time he saw the Empress, his heart would palpitate with excitement. Any man who was chosen by such a woman to be her husband and then retracted all the spikes on his body would probably not refuse. "I'm hungry." The Empress met his gaze and looked back. "Okay." Rinpoche smiled, turned around, and went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. Rinpoche first made porridge and then began to fry the eggs. These were all that was left at home. The vegetables that were bought when the Empress was still around had rotted away in the refrigerator. "There's a fire." The Empress's cold voice was heard. Rinpoche immediately turned his head and looked around. There were no signs of fire in the surroundings. "It's downstairs." Rinpoche then ran out of the kitchen. Sure enough, there was already black smoke drifting up from downstairs. Rinpoche didn't know if there was anyone downstairs. He hurriedly ran upstairs and called the fire department. At the same time he looked down from the window. It was just below him on the 6th floor. Rinpoche also saw half a body sticking out of the window. It was a woman. "I'm calling the fire department," Rinpoche shouted. "Help, the door can't be opened and I can't run out. Please pass me a rope." The woman downstairs raised her head and pleaded. From her voice she didn't sound old. He couldn't make out her appearance as her face was completely black from the smoke. Rinpoche turned his head and looked around. Where was the rope? "Your Majesty, can you do me a favor?" Rinpoche turned his head and asked the Empress. Even though he didn't know the person downstairs, he couldn't possibly let such a woman face the fire alone. It was just a small effort. If he could help, he would help. After all, he was a good person. The Empress's facial expression changed. The person downstairs wasn't an aboriginal. Furthermore, from her voice, it was a woman. However, since Rinpoche requested, she still nodded her head. "I'll trouble your Majesty to help me open the door." Rinpoche thanked her. He hurriedly ran to the corridor in his pajamas, opened the fire hydrant, took out the fire extinguisher and ran to the 6th floor. The Empress followed closely behind him. At this moment there was already someone on the 6th floor. Rinpoche didn't know if it was the person next door or the person downstairs. A middle-aged man was smashing the door lock with a hammer. "Let me do it." Rinpoche saw the situation and put the fire extinguisher aside. Originally he thought that he could get the Empress to smash the door lock with a slap. However, he couldn't do that now that there was someone here. Fortunately, he had over 140 kilograms of strength. He felt that he should be slightly stronger than that middle-aged man. He grabbed the hammer and smashed it twice. The door handle, which was already on the verge of collapse, was smashed down. However, after smashing it down, he realized that the door still couldn't be opened. There's someone in the house. Do you have a rope? I'll go down from the window and let her climb up, Rinpoche said to that middle-aged man. Yes. After Rinpoche snatched the hammer away from that middle-aged man, he turned around and saw the Empress in red. Immediately he couldn't take his eyes off her. Until the Empress's face started to turn frosty. That middle-aged man shivered. He didn't know why, but a feeling of fear arose in his heart. He subconsciously looked away. At this moment, after hearing Rinpoche's words, he immediately agreed and hurriedly ran downstairs to get the rope. After he left, a spotlessly white hand smacked the position of the door lock. With a bang, the chain immediately dented the surrounding iron. Following which, all the parts of the lock flew into the house. After the Empress finished smacking the door, she turned around and left. Rinpoche was stunned for a moment. He stretched out his hand and pulled the door open. A gust of scorching hot smoke and flames immediately spurted out. The shoe cabinet at the door had already started to catch fire. Rinpoche couldn't care less about anything else. He immediately turned on the fire extinguisher and started to extinguish the fire. That middle-aged man ran back with the rope and realized that the door was already open. He was immediately stunned, but he immediately picked up the fire extinguisher from the 6th floor and started to extinguish the fire. After using 2 cans of fire extinguisher, the fire in the living room was basically extinguished. Only the kitchen was still burning. A girl with a face full of soot ran out. She knelt on the ground and gasped for breath. "Oh, I thought I was going to die just now." The girl cried loudly. At this moment, Rinpoche estimated that she was only 17 or 18 years old. "It's alright as long as you're fine. The firefighters will be here soon," Rinpoche casually said. Since she was fine, there was no need for him to stay any longer. When Rinpoche returned, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa. She only shot a glance at Rinpoche when he returned. Rinpoche looked at the porridge. Fortunately, she was fine. He went to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. His face was also covered in soot and streaks of black and white. While he was washing up and changing into a new set of clothes, the firefighters had already arrived. While Rinpoche and the Empress were having their breakfast quietly, a group of people were studying how the security door became like this after putting out the fire downstairs. The area where the door handle was supposed to be had been smashed in, and the entire security door was dented. Such a door wouldn't become like this even if it was smashed with a sledgehammer, let alone an ordinary one-handed hammer. After Rinpoche finished eating, he kept the bowls and chopsticks before taking out his phone to make a call. Nowadays the Empress needed an identity card. Otherwise it would be troublesome. "I want an identity, a real one, not a fake one," Rinpoche said after the other party picked up the phone. "We don't do this kind of business." The person on the other side of the phone was the place where Rinpoche bought guns twice. Rinpoche really didn't want to trouble Chin. Since the other party could privately run a firearms business in the country, he presumably had a wide network of contacts. An identity card shouldn't be a big problem. In any case, Rinpoche didn't have any connections. Even if he had money, he didn't know who to give it to. He also didn't have the time to bribe someone. 200,000 yuan. You just need to tell me who to look for. After that, let him know first. The other party was silent for a while before replying, "All right." If he wanted a real identity card, he would definitely have to give the other party the Empress's photo and name. As for these people, even though they looked like intelligent people, Rinpoche still couldn't trust them. He was afraid that there would be trouble in the future. The main thing was that the other party's business would make people wary. Chapter 171. An hour later, Rinpoche received a text message. He dialed the number on the message and it was a middle-aged man. After exchanging a few pleasantries, Rinpoche told him about the matter. The gist of it was that he had lost his identity document when he moved here from another place and became an unregistered resident. In fact, both parties were well aware of the truth of the matter. If that was really the case, there was no need to look for him. He could have done it directly at his original location. However, there was no need to say much. The other party did not ask much either. He only made an appointment and hung up the phone. When Rinpoche made the call, he was not far away from the Empress. Seeing that she was looking up at him, he smiled and said, an identity can reduce a lot of trouble. Moreover, don't you want to see more of this world? If you want to take a plane or go abroad, identification is a must. The identity management in this world is very strict. The internet is also very developed. It can be found out in an instant. The Empress nodded. She had too many things she did not understand about this world. However, there was someone around who understood these things. She just had to listen to his arrangements. Your Majesty, let me take a photo for you, Ren Baqin suddenly said with a smile. The Empress raised her head and was slightly puzzled. What? Ren Baqin picked up his phone and casually took a picture of the room. He brought the phone to the Empress and said, "It's the same as what you see on TV. The picture can be preserved. I feel that this can preserve the most beautiful moment of your Majesty." The Empress looked at the picture on Ren Baqin's phone and compared it with the picture of the corner that Ren Baqin took just now. She asked curiously, "How is this done?" "It's just like how the human eye can see the scenery. In fact, it's the light that projects the scenery into the human eye, which is then turned into an image by the brain. The same principle applies to cell phones or cameras. Light is cast into the cell phone or camera and the image is left behind." The Empress frowned and pondered for a moment. Her face turned cold and said, "I don't understand. This thing won't suck my soul into it, right?" Ren Baqin almost vomited blood when he heard this. He did not know whether to laugh or cry. He did not expect the Empress to be so cute. After spending a long time talking and using his cell phone to search for the principle of the camera, he finally convinced the Empress that this thing would not suck her soul into it and would only leave behind an image. At the same time, he took a picture of himself to make sure that there was no problem. After all, people will always change and the things around them won't exist forever. Whether it's friends or others, taking pictures is to preserve the precious images in one's memory. Besides, it's necessary to take a photo to create an identity. After a long time, the Empress nodded her head slightly to show that she trusted him. This was already an extremely rare trust. After all, the Empress didn't understand such things at all. Ren Baqin squatted down in front of the Empress and took a photo of the motionless Empress. He could see that she was a little nervous as her fingers were clenched together. After taking the photo, Ren Baqin showed her the upper body of the Empress. She felt that there was nothing wrong with her body and finally felt relieved. "Your Majesty, say eggplant." Ren Baqin ran to a nearby location and aimed his phone at the Empress, who was sitting on the sofa. All he got in return was a cold stare. Ren Baqin looked at the image of a lady dressed in red with the sun shining on her body. Her face was as beautiful as a painting. Ren Baqin became even more excited. He changed a few angles to capture the Empress. After that, he sat beside her and said, "Your Majesty, this will be able to preserve your most beautiful moment forever. Everyone in Dayo and the entire world can see your Majesty at this moment." "I've eaten the jade embryo so I won't grow old," the Empress said coldly. Ren Baqin still didn't know about the jade embryo. When Hongwu gave the jade embryo to the Empress, no one explained it to him. After hearing this sentence, he was immediately astonished. After asking around, he found out about the effects of the jade embryo. This was a treasure that everyone, from the head of state to the commoners, would go crazy for. It was a pity that this kind of treasure was extremely rare in that world. Otherwise, Hongwu wouldn't have given it to the Empress as a birthday gift and caused everyone to exclaim in admiration. Ren Baqin looked at the photo of the Empress in his phone. He always wanted to take the most beautiful photo of the Empress, print it, and post it to the ends of the earth so that the whole world could see what the Empress of Dayo, the seventh most beautiful person in the world, looked like. For example, it would be pretty good to hang it on the top of the city wall. He just didn't know if anyone would find it disrespectful. At this moment, Ren Baqin's thoughts were more or less showing off. Ren Baqin looked at the time. It was about time to set off and reach the agreed location. He said to the Empress, "Your Majesty, let's help you with your identity first. After that, we'll take a stroll in the city." After changing his clothes, he came down from the sofa with a phone in his hand. It was prepared previously and only had his phone number saved in it. "Your Majesty, it's more convenient to contact each other if you get separated from each other." Ren Baqin passed the phone to the Empress. The Empress had long been curious about this thing. After all, it was possible to hear the voices of people from far away through such a small device. If the army had such a device, it would be too convenient. How do I use this? The Empress raised her head and asked. She didn't understand anything about this world. While it was full of novelty, it also made her somewhat uncomfortable. It had been a long time since she felt so powerless. Ren Baqin taught the Empress how to use the phone. At the same time he demonstrated how to dial his own number. He placed the phone beside the Empress's ear and pressed the answer button. "Your Majesty." Rinpoche smiled warmly at the Empress, who was very close to him and could smell the fragrance on her body. After hearing the voice of the man in front of her and the voice that came from the phone, the Empress took the phone and fiddled with it a few times. She then repeated the operation that Rinpoche had just taught her. The Empress went out with a red dress. This time she was wearing a long leather coat with mink fur at the collar. That cold and detached aura of hers became even more intense. It was already the middle of March. Even though it was still a little cold, the sunlight felt very comfortable. The streets in March were much livelier and brighter than in winter. After a harsh winter, everyone could feel the feeling of vitality. Everyone's spirit was much better than in winter. Many people had a relaxed look on their faces. The two of them arrived at the Civil Affairs Department. Rinpoche turned to the Empress and said, "Your Majesty, why don't you wait here for a while? I don't think you will like so many people inside." The Empress shook her head slightly and said, "I will go with you. I also want to see how you do things here." An hour later the two of them walked out. Rinpoche had a temporary identity card in his hand. The name on it was Xiao. Just now, when the Empress went in, the person who handled the identification was immediately stunned, as Rinpoche expected. As someone who dealt with all kinds of people all year round, how could he not see that Xiao wasn't an ordinary person? But how could such a person be an unregistered resident? Fortunately, everything was settled smoothly in the end. Now the Empress could be considered to have settled down on Earth. Chapter 172. Along with the whistling sound, Rinpoche and the Empress felt the pressure from the accelerating plane. The scenery outside the window also proved this point. Looking down through the window, they could see that everything on the ground was getting smaller and smaller until everything on the ground was the size of an ant. The plane began to stabilize, and after a while it rose again. "Xiao, are you all right?" Rinpoche looked at Xiao, who was sitting by the window, and asked. He could see that she was a little nervous. On land she was the seventh most powerful expert in the world, but in the sky she felt that everything was out of her control. At this height, even with her skills, she would definitely die if she fell. "Won't I fall?" The Empress frowned as she looked out of the window. "It's safer than driving. There won't be any problems," Rinpoche comforted her softly. "Pa." A soft sound was heard. While Rinpoche was still looking for the source of the sound, he saw that the armrest between them had actually been crushed by the Empress and turned into a pile of fragments. Many people would be nervous during their first time in the air. However, the Empress only used a little more strength, and the current situation became like this. Looking at this, Rinpoche was considering whether to make a false accusation that the quality of the armrest was too poor. Seeing that the Empress was still nervous, Rinpoche stretched out his hand and said, "You can hold my hand for a while, but don't crush it." This wasn't a joke, it was the truth. How could his hand not be as hard as the armrest? If his hand was crushed, he would probably have to amputate it. The Empress glanced at him, turned around, and continued to look out of the window. Her tightly clenched hand finally loosened, and the fragments fell to the ground. At this moment, both of them were on a plane flying to Jianghu, 3YA. Previously, Rinpoche asked, "Your Majesty, do you want to see the sea?" A few hours later, both of them were sitting here. In this season they still had to go to Jianghu to see the sea. The seaside in the north could freeze people to death, and there was nothing much to see in the cold weather. Rinpoche wanted to know if the Empress would wear a swimsuit, but this was just a thought. If he were to raise this thought, he would probably be slapped to death. The last time he showed her how to wear a bra, his phone was destroyed. When the plane flew above the clouds, the Empress's eyes widened a little. At this moment, the clouds were like floating continents that reflected the sunlight. It was extremely spectacular and beautiful. A moment later, when the air stewardess passed by, Rinpoche called out to her. He pointed at the armrest with an innocent look on his face and said, "The quality of your armrest is too poor. It breaks when I pinch it." Looking at the two people in front of her, she had an impression of the woman in the red dress. She was too beautiful, full of heroic spirit, and her aura was even more powerful. When she looked at her, she actually felt inferior. Just now in the rear cabin, she had even discussed with the other air stewardesses, wondering what kind of family she came from. She had just heard the first half of Rinpoche's sentence, and she was still thinking about what he meant. However, when the stewardess saw the shattered armrest of the seat, she was clearly surprised. She knew the quality of the seat armrest. How could it be broken with just a pinch? But the truth was right before their eyes. I'm sorry, sir, and this lady. The flight attendant apologized first. Regardless of whether she believed it or not, the armrest was indeed broken. Furthermore, it couldn't have been broken by human hands. It could only be that there was a problem with the armrest that wasn't discovered beforehand. She also didn't mention anything about compensation. After all, this incident had never happened before. She also didn't know how to deal with it. She had to ask the company after the plane landed. However, she assumed that the company wouldn't ask for compensation. After all, the seat armrest on the plane was broken with just a pinch. This was a huge black mark. As long as the other party didn't tell anyone about this incident, the company would be thankful. It's alright, I'm just informing you to check more next time. Ren Baqin smiled politely. After waiting for the stupefied flight attendant to leave, Ren Baqin laughed to himself. In the past, he had never made such a false accusation. These days he had changed more and more. Is this thing very expensive? The Empress turned around and asked Ren Baqin after getting tired of looking at the scenery of the clouds. The plane had really broadened her horizons. Previously, she never thought that there would be a time where she could fly above the clouds. According to the legends of Great Xia, that was the residence of the immortals. However, there weren't any immortals in this world. It seemed that it wasn't difficult to fly above the clouds. The monthly salary of the most ordinary citizen can probably afford to fly twice, right? It shouldn't be considered expensive. If it's a long-distance trip, the speed is very fast. It will only take 6 hours to travel more than 3,000 kilometers. The Empress calculated in her heart. The distance from Lan City to Great Xia was about 3,000 kilometers. It would take half a month for a horse carriage to travel and about 4 days for a cavalryman to travel at top speed. In this world, it would probably take less than 4 hours to reach Great Xia. This was the power of technology in this world. This was what Dayo lacked, a power that far surpassed that of the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation, and Great Xia. When the plane arrived in Yenzhou, it was already 10 p.m. Ren Baqin felt the hot weather the moment he got off the plane. He took his and the Empress's coats and left the airport. Although it was already late at night, the outside was still brightly lit. Furthermore, the fresh air and the holiday atmosphere made people feel relaxed. They took a taxi to the Sea Charm Hotel, which they had previously booked. It was a luxurious sea-view room with 2 bedrooms and 1 living room. After putting down his things, Ren Baqin went to the window of the living room. From here he could hear the sound of the waves and smell the sea. He had long wanted to come here. The Empress came to Ren Baqin's side. Although she couldn't see anything, she could still hear the sound of the waves. To her, the sea was something that she had only seen in books. There were only a few descriptions of it. Her deepest impression of the sea was that it could be used to produce salt. If Dayo had a sea, they wouldn't have to worry about salt. Subsequently, both of them ordered some dinner before returning to their respective rooms to rest. The next day, Ren Baqin woke up early and stood in front of the window to look at the blue sky and white clouds outside. The bright and beautiful weather put him in a good mood. At this time of the day, it was indeed much more comfortable here than in the north. At this moment, standing here and looking outside, there were already people who had woken up early and were taking a stroll on the beach. When he came out of the room, the Empress was already sitting on the sofa and switching on the television. These days she would wake up early to watch the morning news. Every day she would learn a lot of things from it. However, she rarely asked Ren Baqin. Most of the things were kept in her heart and would only be asked when she felt it was necessary. Like a sponge, she slowly understood the knowledge of this world. Ren Baqin felt that if she really wanted to understand more, it would be better for her to learn the language of this world and use the internet to understand more. It was much more efficient than watching the television. After finishing breakfast, Ren Baqin changed his clothes and went out for a stroll with the Empress. The environment of the hotel was pretty good. The greenery in the courtyard was very good, and there was even a swimming pool. The people coming and going were all relaxed tourists. After leaving the hotel and turning a corner, a white beach and azure sea appeared in front of them. Some children were running and playing on the sea. Chapter 173. Ren Baqin and the Empress stepped barefoot on the beach and felt the texture of the fine sand beneath their feet. The sound of the waves rang in their ears. Streaks of white lines surged from afar, slapped on the beach and slowly retreated. What do you think of this place? At this moment, Ren Baqin even omitted his name. The two of them had already agreed to address each other by name when they were outside. If he were to call her Qi Zixiao, it would be too distant. If he were to call her Zixiao, Ren Baqin couldn't bring himself to say it. At the end of the day, he was just an ordinary young man who had never been in love before, and he was a bit of a loner. Even though he had changed a lot these days, he was still somewhat restrained. The Empress turned her head and looked at the azure sea. Then, she looked at the children running around and the wanderers with relaxed smiles on their faces. She said, "It's very peaceful. For ordinary people, this kind of life is very good." Yes. Rinpoche nodded. It was a pity that the people around him were not ordinary people. So the sea is like this. I've thought about it many times in the past, but I can't think of anything, the Empress said again. On Earth, even a child could learn what the ocean looked like through various channels. However, in that world, even the Empress found it hard to imagine things that she had never encountered before. Of course, that world also had its merits. For example, martial techniques, cultivation methods, lifespan extension, and all kinds of treasures were hard to imagine on Earth. In general, Earth was more suitable for ordinary people to live a stable life. Do you want to try? Rinpoche said to the Empress. He took a few steps toward the sea, allowing the seawater to splash on his feet and calves. The Empress hesitated for a moment before taking a few steps forward. She lowered her head and looked at the seawater that was splashing up and submerging her feet. Do you want to take a picture? Rinpoche looked at the Empress, took out his phone and placed it in front of him. The Empress didn't pay attention to him. He minded his own business and took a few pictures of her silhouette. Then he put away his phone. The two of them stood on the beach for a while, then slowly walked back. Hey, be careful. Suddenly, a shout came from the side. Rinpoche turned his head and saw a ball flying in his direction. Furthermore, it was heading straight for the Empress. Not far from him were 6 young foreigners in shorts and t-shirts, with a net in the middle. Quite a few of them had smiles on their faces, but it was unknown if they were doing it on purpose or not. Looking at their expressions, it was very likely that they were doing this on purpose. This was not necessarily malicious. Sometimes they just wanted to see what that person's face looked like. If they hit someone and then ran up to apologize and say a few words, this was considered a small game for them. This kind of thing is not rare. However, the other party had obviously chosen the wrong target this time. The Empress didn't move at all. She raised her hand and gently swatted the incoming volleyball as if she was swatting a fly. At a speed that was much faster than when it came, the ball whizzed back like a cannonball. Boom. A young foreign man who was facing this side was sent flying into the air after his face came into close contact with the volleyball. The young man fell backward, and a line of blood spurted out from his raised face. Even from afar, Rinpoche could feel the pain. I have to say, you guys brought this upon yourselves. The Empress had no intention of stopping at all. Rinpoche quickened his pace and followed beside her. As for those foreigners, he couldn't be bothered. However, he didn't want to bother about them. Instead, they recklessly ran over and blocked their way. The golden-haired, muscular young man in the lead said in clumsy Mandarin, "You guys hit my friend, you have to apologize to him." The 4 of them were taller than the 2 of them, and they were completely looking at the Empress when they said that. When they blocked their way, they were very surprised to see the Empress's face. She was really too stunning. Rinpoche looked at these reckless people and shook his head. Just now, she only used one hand to gently swat the volleyball back. Didn't you see that? You actually dared to come here? Also, did the Empress use the word apologize? Get lost. The Empress didn't care about what they said and only threw out these words coldly. You guys are the ones who threw the ball over. Rinpoche took a step forward and said, Did you guys think that you were hit by a lady? The few of them looked at each other. One of them looked at the Empress and insisted, It was an accident just now, you have to apologize to my friend. The Empress turned her head and looked at Rinpoche. Her expression was indifferent, but her eyes revealed an inquisitive look. Rinpoche subconsciously felt that she wasn't asking him what to do, but whether he could beat her to death. He didn't know why, but he felt that way. Rinpoche didn't know what to say at this moment. However, before he said anything, the Empress had already made her decision. Everyone still didn't know what happened. The young man who spoke just now was immediately sent flying and directly knocked down the person behind him. Rinpoche didn't even notice how she made her move. He only felt that the Empress might have kicked him just now from the movement of her skirt. After the 2 of them left, Rinpoche could still hear the panicked shouts of the few young people behind him. After all, no one saw the stunning lady suddenly make a move, or rather, a kick. They completely didn't know what happened. Zixiao, it's better not to make a move here. After all, your identity is special and you can't be discovered by others. Rinpoche leaned close to the Empress's ear and suddenly said. The sudden address made the Empress stop in her tracks. She turned her head and looked at him. It doesn't matter if they are dead or alive. The key is that if you do that, you will attract the attention of the nation or some people. This is a dangerous thing for you. Even if you aren't afraid, there will still be a lot of trouble. Ren Baqin felt a little apprehensive. Just now, he had impulsively called out her name. He didn't know if the Empress would have any reaction. The Empress stared at his face with a pair of cool eyes. After a while, she shifted her gaze away and continued to walk forward. However, her ears were slightly red. Ren Baqin directly called her name, causing her heart to beat faster in a peculiar manner. Once again she was at a loss as to what to do. Suddenly she didn't know what to say. Even though she had already chosen this person to be her husband, and she had heard a lot of things from him before. Every time she had this kind of feeling, she would feel a little flustered in her heart. As for the other words, she completely didn't hear them clearly. Only God knew what he said. It was just that the words Zishuan kept reverberating in her ears. Ren Baqin had no choice but to follow her again. What he said just now was enough. From the looks of it, the Empress was already very well controlled in this world. In fact, the reason why he said that was because those people just now weren't dangerous. If they could really pose a threat, Ren Baqin wouldn't be so pedantic as to not make a move. After all, he had more than one life on his hands. He just didn't want the Empress to expose her uniqueness. He enjoyed the warm life with the Empress on Earth very much and didn't want it to be interrupted. Chapter 174. After leaving the beach, Ren Baqin rented a car. Then he went to a supermarket and bought a lot of ingredients for barbecuing and loaded them into the car. Then he drove the Empress on the road aimlessly. The wind blew into the car and messed up the Empress's hair. From time to time, it would brush against Ren Baqin's face. The sun, the coast, the road, and aimless travel. Ren Baqin felt that this was his dream life. He turned on the multimedia in the car and pressed a few buttons. Immediately, cheerful and lively music started playing in the car. Wear a floral shirt with a ukulele. Otherwise you will look like a gangster brother. Wear a suit with a female companion. Otherwise you will look like a valet. He tapped the steering wheel with one hand and turned to look at the Empress from time to time. When will Dayo become like this? The Empress asked after thinking for a long time. She could feel the joy and satisfaction of everyone here, which was more obvious than in the fast-paced cities. Technology and education are the foundation of everything. The development of society can't be separated from these. Although there are rich and poor people here. The rich are as rich as a country and the poor have difficulty eating. But most ordinary people can meet their basic material needs. They can do this because they have more abundant materials and low prices. The advancement of technology is the prerequisite for achieving these things. For technology to advance, it doesn't require one or two people, but a majority of people to receive education. Commoners don't just farm and hunt, but also contribute to the country. For example, in this world, children start studying at the age of 8 until they are 16 or 17. After high school they go to university, master's and doctorate. The minimum is 9 years, the majority 16 years, and a few even study for more than 20 years. This kind of education allows everyone to have a certain understanding of the world. Every year, there are about 7 million people who graduate from university after 16 years of study. After these people finish their studies, they influence all aspects of society, including the birth of technology. The Empress was surprised again when she heard the number. Dayo had a total population of less than 40 million, and there were 7 million people who completed their 16 years of study here every year. If she hadn't come to this world, it would be hard to believe such a thing. However, after coming to this world twice, she felt that it wasn't a lie. The people around her couldn't possibly lie to her about this. Furthermore, from what he had seen in the past few days, the people of this world were very weak and couldn't be compared to the Aboriginals. However, in terms of speech and perception, they were much better than the Aboriginals. Zixiao, forgive me for speaking bluntly, but Dayo basically doesn't have any basic education. It's still at the primitive stage of farming and hunting. Only a small number of imperial court officials were educated. These people might do well in their positions, such as in the 6 ministries or other positions, but it was very difficult for them to promote scientific and technological progress in a few decades or even centuries. The ratio of ordinary people becoming geniuses through learning might not be high, but with enough people, a sufficient number of geniuses could grow. Together, these people could change a country or even a world. The most important thing here was that they had learned and gained knowledge. We have 3 sayings here. Knowledge changes fate, knowledge creates wealth, and knowledge is power. A human strength was 100 or 1,000 pounds, but a machine's strength could be 100 or 1,000 times stronger. Something that required 10 or even 100 people to do could be easily done by a machine. As long as there was knowledge, there would be enough power. For example, this car. Ren Baqin patted the steering wheel. For example, the plane can fly people in the sky, and the rocket can even send people beyond Earth. These are things that can't be done by human power. What do you learn? The Empress asked. There are many things that are all-inclusive. The content of learning before high school is the same, basic education. It includes mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, language, and history. After high school, it is up to each person to choose the direction of study. Some study physics and chemistry and study the rules of this world, as well as the various changes in the composition of matter. Those who studied medicine would become doctors and treat patients after their studies. There were those who studied agriculture. After learning, they would teach others how to grow crops with higher yields and research on crops with higher yields. Some study machinery and design and manufacture machines that can replace human power. The work of 10 or 100 people can be done by a machine. For example, cars, planes, and other things are the same. Some study music and play all kinds of inspiring music, just like the song that is playing now. Some study construction and study how to build various kinds of buildings in various terrains. You have seen those tall buildings. There are even people who study foreign languages, cooking, repair, and so on. There are also many people who choose to become teachers after learning and teach students what they have learned. Therefore, there is no lack of teachers here. Ren Baqin parked his car by the roadside and introduced proudly. Here, the brain is the most powerful force. Knowledge can be found everywhere, but it is also the most valuable. Of course, he selectively filtered out some things. For example, the Empress might find it hard to understand why they had to learn how to run, jump, and long jump. Economics and politics were also difficult to understand. The Empress listened to Ren Baqin and looked into the distance. She realized that what Ren Baqin said was the biggest difference between this world and Dayo. Everyone was like a dragon. So, what do you want to do? The Empress looked at Ren Baqin and asked. Her eyes were no longer cold, but had a tinge of expectation. First, we will deal with the iron mine and well salt at Mount Damo. After that, we will start with education. The Aboriginals are very powerful, but the power of the brain is more powerful than the strength of the body, Ren Baqin replied. He had already considered this matter. There is one more thing, the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation, Ren Baqin continued. In this world, China alone has 56 ethnic groups with different habits and customs. However, these 56 ethnic groups are all integrated together and are part of this nation. They are working hard in the same direction and making contributions to this nation. The remnant citizens of the Hao Nation have been under Dayo's governance for 70 years, but they have never integrated. In fact, they can do many things. The Aboriginals are good at fighting but not at farming, business, manufacturing, etc. However, these remnant citizens of the Hao Nation can make up for the deficiencies of the Aboriginals. Both sides do not necessarily have to oppose each other but can cooperate. Perhaps in your eyes, these people are very weak, and can even be erased with a command from you. They are only kept alive because of the original agreement. However, they can also become stronger, Ren Baqin continued. Although he had never seen the remnant citizens of the Hao Nation, the Aboriginals and the remnant citizens were still in a state of complete opposition after the Hao Nation had been destroyed for so long. They even had to be guarded by the army to prevent them from playing tricks or even rebelling. This was a complete waste. It was a waste of military strength and also a waste of nearly 20 million people. If these people could be liberated, how many things could they do? They will rebel. Even now they are not obedient, the Empress immediately said. They are like caged birds, unable to see any future. In the past 70 years, you have not integrated them, which is why they are so restless. However, it can't always be like this. If we conquer the Yun Nation, the Qin Nation, or even Great Xia, do we have to encircle them in a designated location and constantly guard against their rebellions? Ren Baqin said bluntly. I have never thought of conquering them, and the late emperor also did not have this intention. Otherwise, the Yun Nation would have been destroyed decades ago. The Aboriginals lack manpower. Many of them are still living in the mountains and are not enough to control such a large territory, the Empress said. Therefore, it is really a waste for those people to be there. If they can be used, the strength of Dayo will increase a lot, even if not double, and the lives of the people will be better than now. Didn't he let them manage themselves now? Why not let them do more things? I have mentioned this matter to Her Majesty before. We can completely integrate them into Dayo as long as we pull out a few disloyal people. Most of the commoners don't have many thoughts. As long as they can live and work in peace and see hope, it will be fine. As long as they strengthen their recognition of Dayo, they will not have disloyal thoughts. Even if they have disloyal thoughts, there won't be too many people following them and they won't cause too much trouble. If Her Majesty is worried, you can do it bit by bit and slowly integrate them into Dayo. As long as the Aboriginals control some key places, they won't be able to cause any trouble. Decades ago the entire Hao nation was conquered. What else do these people have to worry about now? The imperial court will not agree. Rinpoche could imagine that there would be a lot of resistance to this matter. We can do it bit by bit and let a small portion of the Hao nation's remnant citizens come out. Then we will see what kind of changes will occur. A few 100,000 people won't cause much of an impact. Instead they might see some changes. Do you have any ideas? The Empress asked. Chapter 175. Both of them sat in the car and listened to a cheerful tune, but they were talking about serious issues. After talking for a long time, both of them fell silent again. The Empress was thinking about Rinpoche's words and the future of Dayo. Previously she didn't feel anything when she was in Dayo. Even though there was a gap between Dayo and the Yun nation and the Qin nation, it wasn't that huge. However, in this world she really felt this way. The only thing that the Aboriginals could be proud of was their strong individual strength. According to Rinpoche, the level of civilization was used to represent the two worlds. The difference in civilization between the two worlds was too big. Rinpoche put his hands behind his head and occasionally looked at the side of the Empress's face before looking at the blue sky and white clouds outside. After a long time Rinpoche said, "Shall we roast the meat here? I will go down and prepare first." This was near a beach. The quality of the sand wasn't very good, and there were many reefs around. However, it had a different flavor compared to the calm beach. Rinpoche first found a good place to start a fire with the stove and charcoal. Then he went back to the car to get the marinated meat. After a while, the Empress and Rinpoche sat on the beach with the sea beside them. Each of them sat on a small stool. It couldn't be compared to those high-end restaurants, but it was very comfortable. From time to time, Rinpoche placed the roasted meat on a plate and placed it beside the Empress. No matter how high-end that kind of place is, it can't compare to the palace. The life of ordinary people is more interesting. Ordinary people are bragging, but Your Majesty, you are experiencing life. Rinpoche chattered from time to time and didn't care whether the Empress replied or not. After roasting the meat, the Empress drank a whole bottle of white wine, but her eyes were still clear. Do you know that the Earth is round? Earth is just a planet in this boundless universe. There are countless planets like Earth. There are all kinds of intelligent life on it, such as the Autobots, Decepticons, Ultraman and Super Scions. Rinpoche began to ramble after drinking half a bottle of white wine. In order to increase his persuasiveness, Rinpoche specially used his cell phone to find a video of Transformers for the Empress to watch. Looking at the battle between the giant transformable robot and the humans, the Empress was stunned. The Empress stared at the screen and subconsciously thought about what she would do if she encountered such an enemy. Although the other party was huge, had a steel body and had all kinds of weapons, it wouldn't be a problem for her. However, it was unknown how many ordinary Aboriginals it would take to kill him. Rinpoche watched as the Empress pondered seriously. He found it more and more interesting and the smile on his face widened. The Empress happened to raise her head and saw the smile on his face. Very quickly she realized that this was the movie that Rinpoche had mentioned before. Her face immediately turned cold. "You lied to me." Rinpoche dragged his voice as he drew a parabola in the air and fell into the water with a splash. Rinpoche was dumbfounded the moment he entered the water. The water was so deep that he couldn't even reach the bottom. Furthermore, he didn't know how to swim. Oh, gulp gulp. Oh, gulp. Rinpoche felt that seawater kept pouring into his mouth. His body had no foothold and he struggled desperately. When the Empress saw Rinpoche struggling in the water, she frowned. This guy actually didn't know how to swim. A red shadow flashed across the surface of the water like lightning, grabbed Rinpoche, who was struggling in the water, and slapped the surface of the water with the other hand. The surface of the water first pressed down, and then, like an explosion, a huge water column shot up. The Empress used this force to bounce back to the shore and threw Rinpoche on the beach. Rinpoche vomited seawater for a long time, and even vomited half of his dinner. Following which, he rolled to the side and lay on the beach, gasping for breath. Yee-ha-ha-ha. Rinpoche lay on the beach and suddenly laughed. He was overjoyed. Thinking of how audacious he was to actually use a transformer to bluff the Empress, He really admired himself. As for the Empress's reaction, even though she threw him into the water in a fit of anger, she still fished him out. It seemed like she wasn't really angry. This seemed to be how lovers should interact with each other, right? Even though it was a little too violent. The Empress looked coldly at this fool. Even though she didn't enter the water just now, her body was still quite wet. Many parts of her clothes were directly stuck to her body. After Rinpoche had enough of lying on the beach, he became much more clear-headed. He returned to the sea to wash off most of the sand on his body. Then he wrung out his clothes until they were half dry. Only then did he return to the car, drenched in water. The Empress was already in the car. He drove the car back to the hotel in the middle of the night. Just like that, the two of them stayed in Jianghu for 2 days. On the second day they just strolled around and shopped. They bought a few dresses for the Empress and changed their clothes. Following which, they took a plane back to Shin City. After placing all the big and small bags into the house, the Empress sat on the sofa with a bag of Maltese in her hand. They were bought in Jianghu and unexpectedly the Empress loved them. Even with the Empress's strength, Rinpoche wondered if she would have a toothache if she ate so much sweet food. If the Empress really had a toothache, it wouldn't be easy to find a dentist for her in the future. The two of them had only been back for 10 minutes when they heard a knock on the door. Rinpoche immediately opened the door. Outside was a middle-aged couple with a 17 or 18-year-old girl. The girl was rather delicate and pretty. "Hello, sorry to disturb you. I'm from downstairs. Thank you so much for the past few days." The middle-aged man reached out to grab Rinpoche's hand and said, "Thank you. That day I came up to look for you to thank you, but there was no one at home. Just now I heard some sounds from upstairs and guessed that you were back. Hence I came up to take a look." The girl was also very polite. The middle-aged woman also couldn't help but express her gratitude. If it wasn't for Rinpoche that day, her daughter wouldn't have been able to escape. In the end, anything could have happened. Even if she survived, it would have been a cruel thing for such a girl if she had been burned. They were sincerely grateful to Rinpoche. "It's nothing much. It's the people upstairs and downstairs. If I can help them, I will." Rinpoche smiled and waved his hand. "I would like to treat you to a meal to express my gratitude. Is that okay?" "It's just a simple meal," the middle-aged man invited him. "Forget about the meal, it's just a piece of cake." Rinpoche waved his hand. He wasn't interested in eating. Moreover, the Empress was still in the house. After spending a long time sending the family of 3 off, Rinpoche closed the door and sighed. This gratitude after saving someone was more troublesome than the act of saving someone. At night, he and the Empress watched a movie. It was Stephen Chow's Haunted Night. It was considered a classic horror movie. Rinpoche wanted to see if the Empress would be afraid. The result was just as he expected. The Empress finished watching the movie while eating popcorn without batting an eyelid. Chapter 176. In the cold and quiet Yangxin Palace Hall, 2 silhouettes suddenly appeared out of thin air. Rinpoche was holding a huge cardboard box and a small bag in his hands. After taking a good look at the surroundings, he lowered his head and looked at the Empress's hands. It was empty. "It was in my hands just now, but it disappeared in an instant," the Empress said as she looked at her left hand. After the second medicinal bath, Rinpoche's current strength was about 150 kilograms. The box in his hands and the Empress's strength were about the same. He originally wanted to see if the Empress could bring some with her, but it was proven that it was impossible. The items had disappeared. He didn't know if they were left on Earth or disappeared somewhere during the transmigration. "Your Majesty." Qing Yuan and Hong Wan's voices sounded behind them. The Empress retracted her hand as if she had been electrocuted. "What time is it now?" the Empress turned around and asked. "Your Majesty, it's midnight." The two of them walked to the Empress and said after bowing. From the looks of it, the two of them had been guarding the Empress since she left. It was between 11 o'clock and 1 o'clock in the morning, which was exactly midnight. "Did anything happen in the palace?" the Empress asked again. "Everything is safe. The two of you can leave first," the Empress waved her hand. After the two of them left, she looked at the box in Rinpoche's hands and asked, "What's that?" Rinpoche asked someone to lock the box in his room before the two of them returned. She didn't have the time to ask. "It's a device that uses sunlight to melt steel. It's for demonstration purposes. I'm going to make glass and mirrors and a bigger piece of equipment to melt Mount Damo bit by bit. I thought that there might be some criticism if I build a factory to make glass, so I prepared this. I'm sure the others won't have anything to say about it," Rinpoche said as he patted the box. This was a demonstration of the solar furnace as well as his ability. He was well aware of his current situation. Feng Ho's attitude at the throne room and Tao Jiyuan's attitude at the start were enough to tell him a lot about his current situation. Even if he put himself in his shoes, he would come to the same conclusion. Therefore he wanted to show some things to others. Once his ability was recognized by everyone, it would be much more convenient for him to do various things in the future. After all, he didn't like to be doubted. Okay. The Empress nodded her head, turned around and returned to the couch. Let me know when you're ready tomorrow. I'll let Second Elder and a few others watch. Yes. In that case I shall return first. Ren Baqin carried the box and walked out carefully. When he was outside he found 2 guards to help him send it back to Pingle Park. After returning to Pingle Park, Ren Baqin first practiced Rui visualization before falling asleep on his bed. The next morning, when Ren Baqin saw that the sun was already up, he instructed the imperial bodyguards to move the box to an open space in Pingle Park. In any case, the demonstration only needed an open space that didn't block the sun. Ren Baqin opened the box and revealed a metal plate that was shaped like a pot lid. It was about 1 meter in diameter and had a grid on it. There were 2 other boxes in the box, and inside them were neatly arranged small lenses. It was said that there were 2,000 yuan in total. It had to be said that this job was quite troublesome. The clumsy aboriginal guards couldn't help much, and he was afraid that they would destroy the metal plate if they used too much force. As such, he had no choice but to do it himself. It took him more than 2 hours to install the lenses and his arms were sore. The 2 guards didn't leave either. They watched Ren Baqin from afar and were curious about what he was doing. Occasionally, when they saw those small lenses, they subconsciously felt that they were very precious. Come, help me hold this, Ren Baqin said to the 2 guards and went to find a tree branch. Point this toward the sun at this angle, Ren Baqin instructed the guard. The disc was sparkling like a treasure, and the other guards subconsciously wanted to get closer to take a look. Don't get close, stand to the side. Ren Baqin was shocked by the guard's action. The focal point of the reflection of the sunlight from this disc could directly melt steel, let alone a person. All right, hold it and don't move. Ren Baqin instructed the guard to stand properly while he extended the tree branch to a position that was 1.5 meters away from the center of the disc. When the tree branch reached the focal point, it instantly emitted smoke and then caught on fire. This scene caused the 2 guards to stare blankly. What kind of treasure was this round plate? Ren Baqin went back to his room and found a small copper ring. He put it on the tree branch and extended it toward the focal point. The tree branch instantly ignited, and in less than 7 or 8 seconds the copper ring began to melt. Finally, only half of it remained on the ground. The sun in this world was slightly bigger and hotter than on Earth. As a result, the speed at which the metal melted was faster. Deputy Prefect, what kind of treasure is this? The 2 guards were speechless and finally couldn't help but ask. Ren Baqin smiled and didn't answer. He said, Go and inform Her Majesty. Forget it, I will go myself. He asked someone to put the disc back into the box and placed it in the house. Then he excitedly ran to Jianghu Palace Hall to look for the Empress. Your Majesty, I am done. I have tried it just now and there are no problems, Ren Baqin said with a smile on his face. Oh, I would like to see what exactly you have made. However, there is no hurry. I will get someone to inform Second Elder, Tuan and the others. You can accompany me for my meal first, the Empress said softly. After the Empress finished speaking, she asked Hong Luan to get the Imperial Guards to inform Second Elder, Minister of Revenue Tuan, Minister of Imperial Treasurer Guyu, Minister of Works Tong Jinye, and Minister of Ordnance Feng Ho. Your Majesty, we need mirrors to make this kind of solar furnace. I feel that we can build a glass factory in the name of the palace. The glass and mirrors produced can be circulated in the market or sold to the rich people in other countries. I believe that they will be willing to pay a high price. Then we can use this money to purchase goods and transport them back to our country. In the name of the palace? The Empress didn't have much of a concept of making money. Yes, the palace will send people to do it. The palace will open its own shops to sell the products and form its own caravans to transport the products to other countries. Then we will use the money earned from the sales to purchase goods and sell them back to our country at a slightly higher price. This will not only benefit the commoners and make them feel grateful to your Majesty, but also ensure the financial resources of the palace. At the same time, it will be completely controlled by the palace. This will also prevent a lot of things from happening, such as other people interfering, Ren Baqin explained. If you put it this way, it is feasible, the Empress nodded her head and said. You want to form a caravan? the Empress asked. Yes, it is imperative. After all, by transporting goods from one place to another and selling them, the profits are huge. It can completely replenish the national treasury when needed. For example, if the cost of making a mirror is half a tael of silver, it can be sold for 5 taels of silver in our country. However, when transported to other countries, it can be sold for 15 taels of silver. This money will flow into our country from abroad. This kind of trade will make our country rich. All along they have been selling their goods to us. Even though they are able to replenish the various goods that Dayo lacks, if this continues, Dayo's wealth will continue to flow out. Dayo's wealth will be used to support the nobles of other countries. By forming a caravan, we can form a balance in this kind of trade flow. At the same time, we can also send news from other countries back to our country through these caravans. Rinpoche simply explained the economic knowledge that everyone on earth knew. Chapter 177. Rinpoche and the Empress had their lunch. It was rather peaceful during this period. Both of them would occasionally exchange a few words, but most of the time they were fighting with their food. The Empress's actions while eating were very pleasing to the eye. Although she was an aboriginal and no one had taught her any etiquette, her every move exuded an air of nobility. After lunch, the two of them sat in the hall for a while. Rinpoche and the Empress chatted for a while about what the glass factory could do. In addition to making mirrors and glass to sell to rich people in other countries, who would then use the money to buy supplies and bring them back, the glass factory could also make all kinds of utensils and things like binoculars that could see thousands of miles away. Rinpoche could easily obtain the manufacturing methods of these things on the internet. He knew what to make and how to make them. This way he would be able to avoid a lot of detours. After chatting for a while, he went back to Pingle Park first when someone arrived. The person waiting outside was Imperial Treasurer Guyu. She was also the mother of Lu Ruoyao, who had a conflict with him previously. She was an aboriginal woman in her 50s who looked to be in her 40s. She was dressed in an official's uniform and had a stern expression on her face. When she saw Rinpoche, she merely glanced at him. She naturally didn't have a good impression of the husband chosen by the Empress. Even though Lu Ruoyao was in the wrong and was punished, she still hated Rinpoche from the bottom of her heart. However, since the Empress had chosen him as her husband, she couldn't do anything about it. Otherwise, if she had the opportunity, she would naturally teach him a lesson. Although it was not accurate to say that one should look at the owner before beating a dog, the meaning was more or less the same. Her daughter was not someone who could be taught a lesson by others. As the high-ranking officials arrived at the palace, everyone stood in Jianghu Palace Hall and looked at each other. No one knew what the Empress was going to do and could only guess. In the eyes of the bystanders, it was probably related to weapons and rations. After all, the people from the Ministry of Works, the Department of Military Arms, and the Ministry of Revenue were all present. The Empress didn't open her mouth and merely said, "We'll talk when everyone is here." Then everyone waited there. The last to arrive was Great Elder Shi. After he arrived, the Empress said, "I have something to show you today." They did not know what His Majesty wanted them to see. He had actually called so many people over. "May I know what your Majesty wants me to see?" Shi cupped his hands and asked. "Since everyone is here, follow me." The Empress got up from her couch and walked out step by step. Everyone hurriedly followed her. Everyone walked in the palace for a while and finally arrived at the entrance of Pingle Park. When the guards at the entrance saw the Empress, they quickly greeted her. The others also knew where they were. Even if he hadn't been here before, he could guess the identity of the person living here just by looking at the courtyard. At this time there was probably only one person living here. Why did His Majesty bring us here? Everyone thought to themselves. Rinpoche was in a daze in the courtyard. When he saw the Empress and the rest arrive at the entrance, he quickly greeted them. He had basically seen the people behind the Empress before. Even if he didn't know their positions, he could roughly guess their positions after hearing the Empress's orders and looking at their uniforms. "Deputy Prefect Rin, show us what it looks like," the Empress said. After Rinpoche acknowledged the order, he took out the round plate that was covered with pieces of mirrors from the box at the corner of the wall. He called the guard who had started the test and took out a few pairs of sunglasses from the box. He handed one of them to the Empress and the rest to everyone else. "Your Majesty, it's better to wear sunglasses so that it won't dazzle your eyes." Everyone took it and studied it carefully. They saw that it was surrounded by a frame and there were 2 black transparent things that looked like polished gems. For a moment they couldn't figure out what it was used for. When the Empress was on Earth, especially in Yezhou, she often saw people wearing sunglasses. After fiddling with it for a while, she put it on. Everyone then came to a realization and followed suit. When looking at things with sunglasses, the light immediately dimmed. The surrounding light wasn't as strong, but it also made people feel a little cooler. One after another, they let out a soft cry of surprise. As usual, Rinpoche first took a tree branch and placed it on the focal point. In an instant, it began to emit smoke and then catch on fire. Everyone saw him place the tree branch in front of that thing and it caught on fire instantly. At that time, they were like the two guards and thought that it was some kind of treasure. Could it be that anything that was shown on would catch on fire? For a moment, everyone's imagination ran wild. "Lend me your saber," Rinpoche said to the guard. Immediately, the guard had a constipated expression on his face. This saber was his livelihood. He absolutely believed that his saber would break if he placed it on the pillar. "I will compensate you later." Rinpoche laughed. Although a small metal piece could also be used, the visual impact of using a saber would be stronger. That guard handed the saber over with a sullen face. Rinpoche placed the saber on the focal point. In less than 10 seconds the wound began to emit smoke. Following which, a red dot began to appear in the middle of the saber. Subsequently it slowly expanded. Molten iron flowed along the saber and dripped onto the ground. A circular hole appeared in the middle of the saber. Hiss. Everyone took in a breath of cold air. The scene of the saber melting was indeed a huge visual impact. It was much more impactful than the impact of the tree branch burning. One had to know that even smelting iron ore required a lot of effort. However, this thing actually melted a hole in the saber in such a short period of time. Its power could be said to be very terrifying. "Congratulations on obtaining this treasure, Your Majesty. May I know where you obtained this treasure?" Shi Qing immediately said. In his heart, he felt that the Empress wouldn't call everyone over just to let them admire the treasure. "Your Majesty, are you preparing to use this treasure at Mount Damo?" On the contrary, Feng Ho's eyes lit up. After all, he was the clearest about what happened at Mount Damo. Now that they had this treasure, the mining speed at Mount Damo would increase significantly. Upon hearing what he said, everyone else also felt that the Empress had called them over for this matter. With this treasure, the mining speed at Mount Damo would increase significantly. "Deputy Prefect Rin, please explain." The Empress opened her mouth and said. Rinpoche asked the guard to put down the disc. He took out 2 mirrors from it and held them in his hands. "Actually, these are just mirrors. Everyone knows that mirrors can reflect light, and light has energy. You can think of light as having heat. Therefore, when the sun shines on your body, it will definitely be hotter than when you are in a room. And mirrors make use of this point. According to a certain angle, the reflected light from many mirrors can be focused on a single point. This can instantly cause that point to have an extremely high temperature. This is what you see as the instantaneous melting of iron." "Are you saying that this treasure is made from these kinds of mirrors?" Everyone looked at the mirrors in Rinpoche's hands curiously. This kind of mirror was given to the Empress by Rinpoche, right? It was just a little small, but it could reflect people so clearly without any blur. It could be considered a good thing. Another person went forward to look at the solar furnace. However, after Rinpoche's demonstration, no one dared to go near the solar furnace. Even the steel knives were melted within a few seconds. If it's shown on a person, the consequences would be terrifying. Yes, all of them are mirrors. I call this a solar furnace. It completely utilizes the energy of the sun to create an extremely high temperature. Furthermore, I intend to build a few larger solar furnaces and place them on Mount Damo. After melting and mining, we can increase the output of Mount Damo's iron ore by 100 times in a short period of time. 100 times. You said that it can increase the output by 100 times? Feng Ho stared at Rinpoche with a blank look. A few days ago, Rinpoche made a trip to Mount Damo and increased the output of Mount Damo's iron ore by 4 to 5 times. Originally, the output of the iron ore for 2 years was only enough to forge 2,000 standard long knives. Now it had increased to 10,000. Such a huge increase had already made him view Rinpoche in a new light. Furthermore, he had been in a good mood recently. But now, he actually said that it was 100 times? What kind of concept was 100 times? The output of 1 million standard long knives in 2 years would be 500,000 a year. This number made him feel unreal. Chapter 178. Mount Damo's iron ore is mined in the open and is easy to transport. The biggest problem is that the iron content is too high and the hardness is too high. Therefore, mining has always been difficult. As long as we make a few large solar furnaces and melt Mount Damo bit by bit, the mining speed will increase immediately. The increase depends on the size and quantity of the solar furnaces, Rinpoche said to the crowd. At this moment, the crowd couldn't be bothered to study the mirror anymore. Everyone's attention was on Rinpoche. Their attention was attracted by what Rinpoche said just now. The lack of iron ore had always troubled Dayo. Even though they could purchase some iron ore from the Yun nation and the Qin nation, the quantity was very little. Those merchants were more interested in transporting high-value, light and bulky goods, such as salt, furs, gems, cloth and porcelain. Ironware had always been very precious. To the aboriginals, a 1-kilogram fine iron dagger could be considered a treasure that could only be obtained after years of accumulation. The Empress wanted to expand the army by 20,000 soldiers. She even had to find a way to prepare weapons. If not for Rinpoche, she would have to exchange some of the treasures stored in the palace treasury for weapons in other nations. During this period, it would be even more difficult for the commoners to buy ironware. However, this couldn't be helped. After all, equipping the new army was the most important thing at present. Therefore, when Rinpoche experimented with the standard weapon of the Imperial Guard reacted as if his son had died. He almost shouted, "As long as the dagger exists, the man exists." To him, this dagger was closer to him than his son. Under such circumstances, when Rinpoche said that he could increase the production of Mount Damo by 100 times, everyone was in disbelief. If that was the case, Rinpoche had really made a great contribution. Even if he didn't do anything in the future, this contribution alone would be enough for him to establish a foothold in Dayo. If Rinpoche said that he could increase the production of Mount Damo by 100 times, they definitely wouldn't believe him and would probably question him in front of the Empress. However, he just demonstrated that he could melt a part of a steel dagger with this disc. Coupled with the characteristics of Mount Damo, even though everyone felt that his words were exaggerated, they felt that it was really possible. Deputy Prefect Ren, are you serious? Tong Jinye, the Minister of Revenue, was a burly man with a braided beard. His eyes flashed as he stared at Rinpoche. Of course, but before that, we need to build the glass factory. Only by building a glass factory can we produce enough mirrors to assemble a solar furnace. What do you need for the glass factory? As long as you can do it, the entire Ministry of Works will be at your disposal, Tu-Wan said solemnly. The Ministry of Revenue is the same. Minister of Revenue Tu-Wan was a woman who looked a bit older than Imperial Treasurer Guyu, but she was very charming. At this moment, everyone knew why His Majesty had summoned them. On one hand, he wanted to observe this treasure, and at the same time, he wanted the cooperation of the various departments in the construction of this glass factory. On the other hand, he wanted the support of the various departments. Money and manpower were definitely needed. However, in order to get a slice of the pie that Rinpoche had laid out for them, none of them would object if he asked them to put in the effort. There's no need to trouble everyone. This glass factory is considered an industry of the palace. Naturally, the palace will allocate funds to build it, Rinpoche said on behalf of the Empress. Everyone was shocked and didn't know what he meant. Soon after, they became pensive. For example, the royal families of Great Xia, the Yun nation, and the Qin nation all had industries. However, Dayo was poor. Regardless of whether it was the previous emperor or the Empress, they had very low requirements for material goods and weren't extravagant. In addition, they didn't put much effort into this, so the royal family didn't have any industries. Needless to say, this was definitely Rinpoche's idea. The Empress wouldn't do this. I will also make arrangements for the solar furnace on Mount Damo. You don't need to do anything, but I will need some craftsmen to build it. At the same time, I will recruit some skilled aboriginals. They must be skilled. Upon hearing this, Tong Jinye, the Minister of Works, didn't object. Needless to say, Rinpoche wanted to increase the mining speed of Mount Damo by 100 times. Even if it was 10 times, the Ministry of Works would support whatever manpower he needed. Increasing the mining speed was already the biggest benefit for the Ministry of Works. Tu-Wan frowned slightly. She had more ideas about what this glass factory could do, but after thinking about it, she felt relieved. After all, this matter was proposed by Deputy Prefect Ren, who was also the husband chosen by the Empress. If he wanted to use the power of the palace to do this, the others couldn't say anything. Because by doing this glass factory would become the Empress's industry in the future. Would she still be able to snatch things from the Empress? As such, no one had any objections. Let's do it then. Seeing that no one spoke, the Empress made the final decision. Yes, Your Majesty, everyone replied. Originally, everyone didn't think much of Rinpoche. After this incident they somewhat looked up to him. After all, to be able to produce such a thing, it was evident that he was capable. Unfortunately he was still too weak. He could be strangled to death with one hand. He wasn't worthy of the Empress. Work on the glass factory will start tomorrow. Deputy Prefect Ren will be in charge and the other departments will do their best to assist. Yes. At this point, the matter had been completely settled. Everyone's trip to the palace wasn't in vain. At least they were able to see such a magical thing, which was an eye-opener for them. They conveniently took the sunglasses away. This group of people didn't think of returning them. After nodding at Renbachin, they put on the sunglasses and left immediately. They were afraid that Renbachin would ask for them back. In their hearts, these sunglasses were still good stuff. After all, they didn't know much about glass. This mirror should be made of gemstones and the workmanship was exquisite. It would be good to take it as a family heirloom. Naturally, they wouldn't know that these sunglasses were bought by Renbachin at the roadside for 30 yuan each. If he wanted, he could bring a sack of them back anytime. Before everyone left, they nodded at Renbachin. This showed that these big shots in the imperial court had more or less acknowledged him. This was a good thing. In the evening he went to Yangshin Palace Hall and chatted with the Empress for a while. He told her about the things needed for the construction of this glass factory. Even though he made it sound simple in the afternoon, there were still a lot of things to do. For example, a blast furnace was needed for both steel making and glass production. Since they were going to use a blast furnace, they would need cement and baked bricks. Also, the materials needed for glass production: sandstone, soda ash, feldspar, dolomite, limestone, mirabilite and so on. Most of these materials needed to be found within the borders of Dayo. Of course, he didn't need to look for them personally. He just needed to bring back a few pieces from Earth for the people of Dayo to find. However, he still needed to make the soda ash. As a result, even though it was just a glass factory, there were a lot of things that needed to be built. Among them, Renbachin was going to provide the cement and baked bricks to the Ministry of Works. There was no need for him to hide this technology. Even if it was glass, after a period of time, after he had earned the most profit, he was going to sell this technology. Among them, cement could be used in the construction of cities, roads, and other aspects. There were also many uses for baked bricks. For example, in the future he wanted to smelt in a blast furnace or build houses for the commoners. He didn't need to grind such big stones and transport them back to the city anymore. Furthermore, brick houses were much better at keeping warm, waterproof, anti-corrosion, and fireproofing than wooden buildings. Chapter 179. Early the next morning, Renbachin took the palace gate token and went out with 2 guards and a few crooked cows. After all, with Renbachin's strength, no one would be at ease if he went out alone. Even he himself was worried. The Empress transferred 2 guards from the palace to him. These 2 guards were much stronger than the original Teng Hulu and Tai Dao. Teng Hulu and Tai Dao had just attained the 4-way heaven level and were equivalent to the initial man-wheel level. Even the weakest person in Dayo's army could reach this level. The 2 guards that the Empress transferred to Renbachin were at the initial Kismet heaven level, which was equivalent to the initial Earthwheel level. They were slightly stronger than the initial Earthwheel experts from the other 3 nations. Walking out of the palace, Renbachin opened his arms wide. He hadn't been out for some time. It felt better to be outside as the palace was too quiet. Riding on the crooked cow, Renbachin traveled in the middle of the road. Behind him were 2 other guards who were also riding crooked cows. They headed straight for the Ministry of Works. The roads in Lan City were very wide. The middle was for mounts and carriages. Pedestrians were on both sides of the road. When they saw the 3 people riding over, they focused their attention and whispered to each other. "Is that the husband chosen by Her Majesty? He looks like he is wearing an official uniform. It must be him. There is no other person like him in Lan City. I don't know what Her Majesty sees in him." However, there was one person in the crowd who left in a hurry after seeing Renbachin and didn't attract anyone's attention. Such comments even drifted into Renbachin's ears. Even though the aboriginals were whispering, their voices were similar to ordinary people's. This made him wonder if the aboriginals had hearing problems. Renbachin couldn't be bothered to pay attention to such comments. After a long time, such comments would naturally decrease. There were many people going in and out of the Ministry of Works. It was much livelier than the Honglu Bureau. After all, the Ministry of Works was in charge of a lot of things. It wasn't something a small yamen like the Honglu Bureau could compare to. Renbachin reported his name and was let in. However, Tong Jingya wasn't there. Ren Baqin waited for more than an hour. He was wearing sunglasses and his nose was almost pointing to the sky. Coupled with his burly physique, bald head and twisted beard, Ren Baqin felt that he was only missing a gold chain. Deputy Prefect Ren, what do you want me to do? Tong Xinye brought Ren Baqin into a room and asked bluntly. Lord Tong, if you want to make glass you must first make a blast furnace. Not only does the glass factory need it, but the Ministry of Works also needs it for metal smelting. By using a blast furnace, the speed of smelting is several times faster than in the past. Furthermore, it requires less wood, Ren Baqin explained as he stood at the side. Tong Xinye was slightly surprised. This Deputy Prefect Ren really knew everything. If it was as he said, the speed of smelting iron ore would be several times faster, and the consumption of wood would be much less, that would be a great thing. Deputy Prefect Ren, please take a seat and tell me in detail. Tong Xinye revealed an extremely interested look on his face. To build a blast furnace we first need two kinds of materials. One is brick and the other is cement. In addition to building blast furnaces, the former could also be used to build houses and various other buildings. In this way there would be no need to transport stones from afar after grinding them. This would save a lot of manpower and resources. Cement is even more useful. In addition to the above, it can also be used to quickly build cities, pave roads and so on, Ren Baqin continued as he sat down. When Tong Xinye heard this, his expression became much more serious. According to what Ren Baqin said, these two materials were extremely valuable and had a wide range of uses. What exactly are the bricks and cement that Deputy Prefect Ren mentioned? Tong Xinye questioned. Ren Baqin roughly explained the uses of the bricks and cement to Tong Xinye. Tong Xinye pondered for a moment and asked, according to what Deputy Prefect Ren said, these bricks and cement are indeed very useful. Are these also made by the palace? These are prepared to be handed over to the Ministry of Works. After all, these two materials are beneficial to the construction of the entire dayo. It is better to let the Ministry of Works make the arrangements as it will be faster. Tong Xinye revealed a smile after hearing what Ren Baqin said. Previously he really didn't wish for these two materials to be guarded by the palace. After all, according to Ren Baqin, these two materials weren't difficult to manufacture and could be used in various aspects. Thank you very much, Deputy Prefect Ren. If there is anything that you need the Ministry of Works to do, feel free to let us know, Tong Xinye said as he stroked his twisted beard. The main thing is the limestone mine. As for clay, it can be found along the river and at the foot of the mountain. Ren Baqin gave a rough description of the limestone. This kind of material had a large reserve and should be easy to find. Deputy Prefect Ren, please wait a moment. After Tong Xinye finished speaking he walked out of the door and shouted, get Tai Zhe and Tai Quan here. After shouting he returned to the house and said to Ren Baqin, these two guys run around every day, they might know about it. In just a few minutes, two burly men ran into the house in a hurry. Sir, are you looking for the two of us? Deputy Prefect Ren has something to ask the two of you. Answer him honestly, Tong Xinye said as he stroked his beard. The two of us haven't caused any trouble these few days? The two of them asked doubtfully. Cut the crap, Tong Xinye scolded. Deputy Prefect Ren, ask away. Have the two of you seen that kind of limestone or cloud rock before? It's... Ren Baqin described a few types of limestone to the two of them. Aren't these things everywhere? The two burly men scratched their heads. Where's the nearest one? Walk in that direction for half a day and you will find it everywhere. One of them looked around for a long time before pointing in the right direction and saying, that direction was northeast of Lan City. Sir Tong, I'm afraid I'll have to borrow these two from you for a while. Ren Baqin turned his head and cupped his hands. From today onwards, the two of you will listen to Sir Ren's instructions. If you make any mistakes, you will be punished, Tong Xinye said to the two of them with his eyes wide open. Yes, sir. The two of them shrunk their necks. I'll have to trouble the two of you to make a trip and bring some back for me to take a look. If it's what I want, it would be the best. If it's not, I'm afraid I'll have to make a few more trips. In addition, there are a few other things that we need. We need feldspar and dolomite. If the two of you know where to find them, you can arrange for someone to bring them back. However, the limestone is of utmost importance, Ren Baqin continued. At the same time, he told them about the characteristics of feldspar and dolomite. That dolomite can be found outside the city for half a day, but it's not in the same direction as before. As for feldspar, there are a few places that might have it, but the two of us can't remember. The two of them pondered for a while and said, well, I'll have to trouble the two of you to search for it. Also, have the two of you seen a kind of black stone that can burn? I'm not sure about that. In that case, I'll have to trouble the two of you to bring back some of the aforementioned items. After the two of them left, Tong Jinya opened his mouth and said, I know about the black stone that can burn. Those people in the south often burn it. Initially, I was curious that it can also be burned. Sir Rin, can't we just use wood to burn it? It's all over the mountain. Rin Baqin was delighted to hear Tong Jinye's words. That thing is much more useful than wood. Furthermore, its temperature is higher than wood. That's a good thing. Chapter 180. Rin Baqin had to admit that the minerals that he was looking for were very common. They were widely distributed and could be easily found in this world. Tai Zhe and Tai Quan had solved most of his problems when they first arrived at the Ministry of Works. After the two of them left, Rin Baqin repeatedly exhorted them to excavate the coal. Not only was the coal resistant, but it was also relatively hot. Whether it was used to bake bricks, make glass or smelt iron, or it was extremely useful. The only problem was that it was too far away. According to Tong Jinye, it would take 10 days to travel by car. Transporting it this way would consume too much manpower and resources. It would be great if they could find the coal within a short distance. After chatting with Tong Jinye for a while, Rin Baqin bade farewell. He only had to wait for the two of them to come back and confirm that it was limestone. After that, he could start mining. Let's go to the Beast Park, Rin Baqin said to the two guards after leaving the Ministry of Works. He had not seen the two little fellows for some time and missed them a little. Secondly, the sweet potatoes should be ripe soon. It was time to go and take a look. As for the small amount of money that he earned from his partnership with Caretaker Shi, he no longer cared about it. To put it in a pretentious way, money was really not of much use to him now. Not far from the Ministry of Works, Rin Baqin had just turned a corner when four people suddenly appeared on top of the wall. They were holding something in their hands and aiming at Rin Baqin. Sir, be careful. When the two guards behind saw this scene, their expressions changed and they immediately shouted. One of them even pounced on Rin Baqin and pushed him off the back of the crooked cow. At the same time there was a buzzing sound. Countless cold lights shot towards Rin Baqin from both sides. They almost enveloped him from all directions. Before Rin Baqin could react, he felt himself being knocked away by a strong force. Following that, he felt a sharp pain in several parts of his body. As for the guard he knocked away, his entire body was like a sieve as he fell straight to the ground. At this moment, Rin Baqin was also lying on the ground. His whole body was in pain and he was completely dumbfounded. He did not expect to be assassinated. If that guard had moved a little slower, he would have become a sieve. He almost died? This sudden realization caused him to lose his composure for a moment. Following that, he felt immense fear and anger. However, the pain in his body made him unable to move. At this time there was a sharp pain coming from his legs, back and waist. This kind of pain made him think that he would die in the next second. Soon he blacked out. The other guard's eyes turned red. He roared and stood in front of Rin Baqin. Men, there's an assassination. The Imperial bodyguard roared. Naturally, he could see the strength of these people. They hadn't even reached the earth wheel level. In a short while he would be able to kill them all. However, if someone were to make use of this opportunity to attack Deputy Prefect Ren would be dead meat. The four people on top of the wall glanced at Rin Baqin, who was lying on the ground, and all of them rushed toward him. The four of them knew that it was impossible for them to leave Lan City alive. Ever since they received this mission, they had been prepared to die. Although Rin Baqin had already been shot a few times, he couldn't leave anyway. He might as well go up and stab the target a few more times to confirm that the target was dead. Poof! The long sword in the guard's hand turned into a streak of snow-white light and chopped the person in front into two. The other three people continued to pounce forward as if they didn't notice. Clang! The guard deflected the sword in one of the people's hands and kicked him to the wall. Following which, he chopped off the head of another person. However, the sword in the hand of the last person, who was also the most powerful person, wasn't aimed at Rin Baqin. Instead, it went straight for the chest of this guard at lightning speed. Just as the guard was chopping off the head of that person, he stabbed his sword into his chest. That guard spurted out blood from his mouth and his eyes were wide open. He threw away his long sword and grabbed his opponent. His hands were like iron pincers. No matter how the other party struggled, he couldn't free himself. Following which, he ferociously slammed his head into the other party's skull, followed by a second and a third time. After a few slams, half of that person's head was left. Brain juice and blood spurted everywhere. following which he casually threw the corpse to one side. However, the sword in his chest didn't move at all. He knew that if he pulled out the sword he would die even faster. Within a minute, someone rushed to the scene and saw the scene of blood flowing all over the ground. Of the two guards, one was riddled with holes while the other stood there with a sword in his chest. There was also Deputy Prefect Ren lying on the ground covered in blood. There were also a few corpses scattered around. Such a scene actually made the person who came to Lan City extremely angry. There was actually someone who dared to assassinate a high-ranking official of the imperial court. Moreover, it was the one with the most special status. However, it was better to quickly check on Ren Baqian's injuries. Both of his legs were pierced through, one side of his waist was pierced through from the front to the back, and there was a bloody groove on his back. However, he was still breathing and his injuries weren't fatal for a short period of time. As for that guard, he was fine for the time being. However, it was hard to say if he was delayed for a while longer. After a while, Ren Baqian was carried by someone and sent to the clinic. Tang Xinye had a fierce look on his face. Do you know who he is? He must be treated no matter what. If he dies, all of you will die too. One had to know that Ren Baqian was involved in a lot of things. He was the husband of the Empress, the iron mine at Mount Damo, better smelting technology, and the cement that he mentioned. No matter what, he couldn't die. How could the doctor at the clinic not know Tang Xinye? Looking at the young man and the official robe that he was wearing, he immediately guessed his identity. After all, there was only one foreigner who was an official in Dayo. After the time it took to burn half an incense stick, there was a boom sound in Yangxin Palace Hall. The entire wooden couch was shattered into pieces. The Empress's face was frosty. In a flash, she appeared outside Yangxin Palace Hall. She soared into the sky and went straight to the clinic. Tang Xinye was looking at the doctor treating Ren Baqian's wounds. Not far away from him was the Imperial Guard. Suddenly, he felt a terrifying aura moving rapidly in his direction. This aura was too familiar. He experienced it a few times a month. He went to the courtyard and waited for the arrival of that person. Greetings, Your Majesty. As a red shadow appeared in the clinic, Tang Xinye lowered his head and greeted. In the next second, his entire body flew out and smashed through 3 walls. Not only was he smashed out of the Imperial Physician's office, but he also flew into a magistrate's office at the side and crashed into another building. The loud noise and the flying stones caused a commotion. In an instant, 7 or 8 people appeared in that courtyard. One had to know that this was the Ministry of War. How dare someone be so presumptuous here? There were even people who jumped on top of the wall to see who was so presumptuous. At this moment, there was a group of people standing in the courtyard of the clinic. All of them were as quiet as cicadas in winter. Before they could speak, Tang Xinye walked out of the half-destroyed building with a distressed look on his face and one hand on his waist. Sir Tong, what's the meaning of this? Qin Shan, the Minister of War, asked with an unfriendly look. Tang Xinye was also angry. Who did he offend? Her Majesty is over there. Tang Xinye's next sentence made the Minister of War, who was eager to get into action, immediately wilt. What happened? Qin Chuan frowned and asked. Even if Her Majesty wasn't happy, she wouldn't do such a thing. Ren Baqian, Deputy Prefect Ren, was just assassinated, Tang Xinye said unhappily. Qin Chuan didn't have any dealings with Ren Baqian. After thinking for a while, he remembered who Ren Baqian was. Chapter 181. Qin Chuan waved his hands and said, "What are you all doing here? Are you itching for a beating? Go back and do whatever you need to do." Immediately, everyone from the Ministry of War dispersed. The Empress was just next door and was obviously on the verge of flying into a rage. At this moment, no one was willing to provoke her and all of them hid as far as they could. In fact, when the Empress came over, she wasn't just 1 or 2 people. Along the way, many people were apprehensive about what had happened to make the Empress so furious and hurriedly followed behind her. However, when they saw Tang Xinye being beaten up so badly, they immediately hid as far as they could. Only Qin Chuan, who had a poor sense of aura, didn't notice the Empress. When Tang Xinye returned to the courtyard, there was a group of trembling doctors and apprentices from the clinic. There were also some people standing on the walls or rooftops watching from afar. They were all high-ranking officials from various departments. Tell me, how did this happen? The Empress stood in front of the door of the clinic. The surrounding aura plummeted and the air seemed to be frozen. Everyone could feel the bone-piercing chill. Just now, the Empress had already gone in to take a look. The most serious injury on Ren Baqian's body was penetrated through his waist. Even though he wouldn't die for the time being, there was a very troublesome matter, and that was the poison on the crossbow arrow. Even though the poison wasn't immediately fatal, it was more troublesome than that. This made her even more furious. If she knew who did it, even if it was in Great Xia's palace, she would immediately kill them. Your Majesty, Deputy Prefect Ren was assassinated when he was about 200 steps away from the Ministry of Works. It was obvious that the other party was well prepared and used repeating crossbows. Their target was Deputy Prefect Ren. When I heard the guard's shouts and rushed over immediately, it was already over. Of the 2 guards, one died on the spot and the other was seriously injured. Tang Xinye described the scene. In fact, he didn't know much, but he was the fastest and arrived at the scene just in time. In the end, he became the punching bag and could only laugh bitterly. Your Majesty, Sir Ren is fine for the time being and his wounds are all fine. However, the poison on the crossbow arrow is still in his body. Even though nothing can be seen on the surface, it has been corroding his body. Without the antidote, I'm afraid he will become a cripple in half a month. Even though he is conscious, he won't be able to move. By that time, the antidote won't be of much use. A spirited old man walked out from the room and said to the Empress, "What poison?" The Empress asked coldly. The name of the 9 pavilions half-death is half-death, derived from the meaning of half-dead. Those who are poisoned by this poison can neither die nor live even if they wanted to. Upon hearing this, the Empress's hair fluttered even though there was no wind. It was as if a gale was surging through the entire courtyard. Everyone felt the strong wind blowing against their faces and couldn't help but take a few steps back. Your Majesty, it's useless to get angry now. It's more important to save Sir Ren. Tang Xinye's face immediately turned green when he saw the Empress's expression, and he hurriedly tried to dissuade her. However, the old man's words also surprised him. The 9 pavilions, as the name suggested, were divided into 9 pavilions. The pavilion masters of each pavilion were top-notch experts. Even if they had not reached the level of the top 10 in the world, they would definitely be able to enter the top 100. Among them, Hua Sanlu, who was the strongest, was ranked 5th in the world. The strength of the 9 pavilions could be imagined with the addition of the 5th most powerful expert in the world and the 8 most powerful experts in the world. The people in the 9 pavilions were known for their unpredictability. One second they would be chatting and drinking with you. The next second they would turn hostile and draw their swords. After killing you they would cry bitterly. There was once a pavilion master who barged into a wedding banquet to drink wine, and the other party treated him like an honored guest. After drinking the wine, the pavilion master didn't say a word and killed everyone in the wedding banquet. Then he decorated the scene into a mourning hall and personally dressed the dead in mourning clothes. No matter who it was, they would probably avoid such a person for fear of not being able to avoid him. In the 9 pavilions it wasn't just 1 or 2 people who were like this, but all of them. The higher one's strength was, the more serious the situation would be. Especially Hua Sanlu. Going to such a place to ask for the antidote was not an easy task no matter how one thought about it. Did you find anything? 7 or 8 people were busy at the place where Rinpochen was assassinated. One of them, a burly man in an official's robe, asked coldly. This burly man wasn't tall. He was only about 1.6 meters tall and was considered extremely short among the aboriginals. However, the people around him were afraid of him. Once he spoke, they immediately gathered together. They walked here, and the 4 of them suddenly jumped up from behind the walls on both sides. At the same time, they aimed their crossbows at one person. If it wasn't for the guard who pushed that person out, he would be the one who became a hedgehog, one of them said. The clothes on these 4 people are made in the Yun nation. Their weapons are also made in the Yun nation. One of the swords is from Great Xia. It should be used by the most powerful person. They don't have anything extra on them. If they are not from Great Xia, then they are from the Yun nation. They are definitely not from the Qin nation, one of them said as he searched the 4 people's bodies. Even though the people from the Qin nation look about the same, their skin is thicker. After all, the wind there is strong. It might be possible for other people to have thin skin, but these people are obviously death warriors trained by big clans. They can't be practicing martial arts in their rooms every day, right? That person turned around and said, "Continue to investigate. How long have these people been in Dayo? Where do they live and who do they have contact with? Don't let any of them go," that burly man said loudly. Just now he sensed that the terrifying aura was heading to the clinic. It had only been slightly more than 30 minutes since the incident happened. The Empress actually rushed over after receiving the news. This showed how much importance she attached to this matter. At the same time, the aura that the Empress emitted just now let everyone know that she was furious. Under such circumstances no one dared to slack off. If they didn't know anything when the Empress asked them later, they would be the unlucky ones. However, the Empress wasn't paying attention to this at this moment. It would take about 10 days to reach the 9 pavilions from here. According to what the old man said just now, Rinpoche could hold on for at most half a month. After this time, even if they had the antidote, it would be useless. Therefore, it was impossible to send someone to the 9 pavilions to ask for the antidote. Not to mention whether or not they could get the antidote, there wasn't enough time. They had to send someone to send Rinpoche over. Furthermore, that person had to be strong enough to get the antidote from the 9 pavilions. In Dayo there were only 2 people who could do all this. Rinpoche and Hongwu. Hongwu was guarding the border. If Rinpoche appeared in Dayo, one could imagine the commotion it would cause. He was afraid that the imperial family of Great Xia wouldn't just watch him go around Great Xia before returning to Dayo. But did he want to watch him die? Chapter 182. Rinpoche was naked. At this point in time, there were only faint scars left on his body. The doctor's office had prepared medicine like the black mud cream and his wounds would heal in a short period of time. However, his eyes were still tightly shut, his face was pale and he was completely unconscious. The Empress stood in front of him for a long time with a complicated look on her face. Not to mention the changes that Rinpoche could bring to Dayo from what the Empress had seen, he was the only person that she had a good impression of for so many years, and she couldn't just watch him die like this. However, if she were to leave Dayo for Great Xia, she was afraid that it would be extremely risky. If she were to go to the 9 pavilions, the risk wouldn't be too high. If there was a conflict, she was afraid that other people would immediately know about it. At that time, it would be difficult for her to leave Great Xia. From the way the 9 pavilions had always handled things, the possibility of a conflict was very high. If it was a normal person, it could still be negotiated. However, it was really unknown what those lunatics in the 9 pavilions would do. At this moment, the Empress was in such a dilemma. After a while, the Empress sighed softly and the coldness on her face dissipated a lot. She lifted the bed with one hand and wrapped Rinpoche up with the cloth on the bed. Following which, she carried Rinpoche with one hand and broke through the door, transforming into a red shadow as she headed for the palace. After the Empress left, everyone in the doctor's office heaved a sigh of relief. Many of them directly sat on the ground and no one around them laughed at him. Just now the Empress gave them a terrifying feeling. She was like a volcano that could erupt at any time, making it hard for them to breathe. Tong Xingye looked at the direction where the Empress disappeared, turned around and asked that old man, "Is there no other way? This kind of poison is extremely rare. Besides the people in the 9 pavilions, no one knows the formula. Naturally, there's no way to detoxify it." That old man shook his head. Tong Xingye also sighed. It would have been fine even if he had to wait for Deputy Prefect Ren to build those things that he mentioned. Yet, it gave him hope and then it came to an abrupt end. He didn't doubt this old man's words at all. Previously, the Empress didn't have the slightest doubt either. If he said there was no other way, then there was definitely no other way. There were still a few old freaks in the imperial court of Dayo. This old man was one of them. The old woman in Qingxin Palace Hall was also one of them. They were called old freaks not only because they were old enough. What about the guard? Tong Xingye asked again. His injuries are very serious. He almost lost his life. He needs to recuperate for a few days, the old man said. Tong Xingye nodded, then shook his head. What a pity. It was a pity for Rinpoche. If it was before, he naturally wouldn't have taken a liking to it. However, after Rinpoche showed him those things, he changed his mind. No matter what, Deputy Prefect Ren's capability in these aspects was admirable. In the future he would cultivate diligently. Even though he was still lacking compared to Her Majesty, he would still be able to accept it. What a pity. Tong Xingye exerted force on his feet and directly landed on a house in the distance. After a few flashes, he disappeared without a trace. The Empress brought Rinpoche back to the palace and went straight to Jianghu Palace Hall. With a wave of her arm, Rinpoche landed on the couch. "Get some clothes from Pingle Park for him to change into," the Empress said coldly. "Yes, Your Majesty," the two of them answered, and Qing Yuan hurried out. "Help me tie up my hair," the Empress said as she sat in front of the mirror. In the mirror, there was an indifferent and heroic-looking lady. After Hong Yuan had tied up her hair, she used her hands to trace the words on both sides of the mirror before turning around to look. At this moment, Qing Yuan was helping Rinba Qian put on his clothes with a red face. After a long time, she finally helped him put on his clothes. The Empress walked a few steps in this hall and looked around. Qing Yuan and Hong Luan felt that Her Majesty was giving off a strange vibe, but they couldn't tell why. Thinking about it, it might be because of the assassination attempt on Deputy Prefect Ren. They didn't know who was so daring and whether or not the culprit was caught. Fortunately, Deputy Prefect Ren was fine. Even though he hadn't woken up and his face was a little pale, his chest was heaving up and down. Presumably he would wake up soon. Otherwise, Her Majesty would definitely be angry. Even if they didn't talk about Her Majesty, they had only seen Her Majesty treat one person like this for so many years. They didn't want Her Majesty to be sad if anything happened to him. Just as the two of them were having wild thoughts, the Empress suddenly said, "Tell Shi Qing if I die, please invite that person back. Jikohai has been thinking about him for so many years. All along, I didn't kill him because I felt that this day might come." After hearing the Empress's words, Qing Yuan and Hong Luan were immediately stunned. They couldn't conceal the shock on their faces and cried out involuntarily, "Your Majesty! It's just a precaution. There isn't anyone in this world who can make me stay." The Empress raised her voice and said with a domineering tone that looked down on the world. However, when the two of them heard these words, they panicked and asked, "Your Majesty, what are you going to do?" "I'm going out for a walk. Tell the Public Order Bureau and the Department of Inspection to investigate. As long as they find someone related, they don't need any evidence. Kill them all. Don't leave anyone alive." While speaking, the Empress appeared beside the bed and lifted Rinba Qian with one hand. When she finished her last word, she had already disappeared from the hall, leaving only the words "Don't leave anyone alive" echoing in the hall. "Your Majesty!" Qing Yuan and Hong Luan shouted loudly. Soon after, they hurriedly ran out of the palace gate, but they couldn't find the Empress. "Quick, call General Xianger over. Something happened to Her Majesty," the two of them shouted in panic. The Empress carried Rinba Qian and went straight to a corner of the palace. After a few flashes, she landed in a courtyard. There was a huge pond in this courtyard. A monster with the head of a lion, antlers of a deer, the eyes of a tiger, the body of a moose, dragon scales, and the tail of an ox was lying in the pond. It was the Kirin that Rinba Qian had seen before. When it sensed the Empress coming in, it immediately stood up and let out a howl at her. Not only was it not scary, but it was also very intimate, as if it was greeting her. The Empress flipped over and stood on its back. She said coldly, "Let's go to the north." How? This time around, the Kirin's howl wasn't as obedient as before. Instead, it was filled with deterrence. Its eyes revealed an excited look as it soared into the sky and landed on the roof of a nearby house. Then, it leaped forward and crossed 5 or 6 courtyards before landing on the roof of another house. "Your Majesty! Your Majesty!" Everyone in the palace was alarmed by the Kirin's howl. Soon after, they saw the Kirin running out of the courtyard. When they saw the red figure standing on its back, they immediately cried out in alarm. Her Majesty actually rode a Kirin out of the palace? Upon seeing this scene, more than a dozen figures immediately leaped up from the palace and hurriedly chased after it. However, before they could go far, the Kirin had already disappeared beyond the palace walls. Xange's face turned ugly. Her Majesty usually wouldn't ride a Kirin out of the palace. From the looks of it, she was going somewhere far away. As the commander of the palace guards, she actually didn't know anything about it. What exactly happened? A moment later, when she heard Hong Luan and Qing Yuan's report, she was completely dumbfounded. After the time it took for an incense stick to burn, Shi Qing, who was sunbathing in his residence, heard the report. His face immediately changed. Jikohai's face turned gloomy after hearing the news. Tong Jinya was completely stunned after hearing the news. Her Majesty actually went to the 9 pavilions alone? The Imperial Court of Dayo was shocked. Chapter 183. In the residence of Great Elder Shi Qing, more than 10 court officials sat in a circle with an ugly look on their faces. Most of them had heard about the assassination today. After all, many people noticed the Empress rushing to the clinic angrily and knew what had happened after asking around. However, no one expected that the Empress would actually bring Rinba Qian to the north alone. Not to mention anything else, just the Empress's actions this time around were hard to accept. You chose him as your husband, but no one agreed. You said you would push him to the earthwheel level and everyone accepted it. Afterwards, it was proven that Rinba Qian was indeed capable. At least, he had increased the output of Mount Damo's iron ore several times. This changed everyone's view of Rinpochen. However, now that Rinpochen was poisoned by the assassination and the Empress brought him to the north alone, everyone couldn't accept this. Even though there was no such saying in Dayo, everyone had the same thought. If anything happened to the Empress, the whole of Dayo would be in chaos. Furthermore, Great Xia was sharpening its knives. The Empress was the strongest martial artist in Dayo. At this moment, everyone felt that this matter was too thorny. Sirs, what should we do now? No matter what, we can't let Her Majesty go to Great Xia alone. Tu-Wan looked at everyone and asked. Let the winged cavalry pick her up, Qin Chuan, the Minister of War, said with a frown. If the winged cavalry enters Great Xia's territory, Great Xia will not sit idly by. By then, Her Majesty will be in even more danger, someone said. It's also very dangerous now, Qin Chuan immediately said. Although everyone was arguing endlessly, after 4 hours, the 1,500 winged cavalry that camped outside Lan City broke camp and headed north. Earlier, a carrier pigeon had already been sent to Hongwu. However, everyone felt that the possibility of Hongwu stopping the Empress was very small. That Kirin crossed mountains and ridges, and no one knew where the Empress would enter Dayo from. The Empress sat sideways on the Kirin's back. No matter how the Kirin ran or jumped, the Empress's body seemed to be glued to its back. Rinpochen was placed on the Empress's lap. It had to be said that the Empress really didn't know how to take care of people. Placing Rinpochen's chest on her lap was already the best she could think of, but in fact, Rinpochen was about to vomit stomach acid. If not for the fact that he was still unconscious, he might have struggled and said, "You should just stab me." Even though Rinpochen was unconscious, it was only because he was unaware of the outside world. He realized that he was in the middle of the lake in the visualization of water. The surface of the lake wasn't as calm as it used to be. Instead, huge waves surged up to the sky. He wanted to dive down, but no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't. Every time he wanted to dive down, he felt as if he was blocked by something, and then he was swept away by the waves. He didn't know how long he had been like this. Just as he was about to lose consciousness, he suddenly woke up from his coma. The first thing he felt was that something was poking at his chest, making him want to vomit, but he couldn't. At the same time, he didn't have any strength left in his body. Even turning his head was difficult. At this moment, he was being placed on something and was moving forward. The ground, weeds, and rocks beneath him were all swept backward quickly. The wind was also blowing against his face. When he let out a groan, the cold expression on the Empress's face changed. She lifted him up and placed him on the Kirin's back, sitting beside her. At this moment, Rinpochen finally woke up a little. From the fragrance he smelled just now, he realized who was beside him. Your Majesty. Rinpochen felt that his throat was very dry. He opened his mouth weakly, but his voice was muffled by the wind. You're awake. The Empress said something that didn't make much sense. The people who tried to assassinate you are all dead, the Empress continued. Your Majesty, where are you going? At this moment, Rinpochen could finally move his neck a little. However, he didn't look forward like a normal person. Instead, he looked at the Empress who was beside him. The first thing he saw was a pair of clear and bright eyes and eyebrows that were filled with heroic spirit. Great Xia, the Empress replied with only 2 words. In fact, she didn't know what to say either. She wasn't a woman who cared about others. Going to Great Xia? Rinpochen's mind was still a little muddled. Even if he wasn't sober, he knew that the Empress was going to Great Xia. This was something that shouldn't have happened. The Empress was the Empress of Dayo, but she actually wanted to go to Great Xia? Also, what was going on with him now? Why did he have to expend so much effort just to move his fingers? Your Majesty, what happened? Rinpochen asked weakly. You have been poisoned. I will bring you to get the antidote. The Empress's voice became colder. Rinpochen was dumbfounded. Was he poisoned? The Empress was bringing him to Great Xia to get the antidote? Was Dayo helpless? Was this poison very difficult to deal with? What will happen if I don't take the antidote? Rinpochen asked. You won't be able to move or speak, but you will be conscious. How long will it take? You must take the antidote within half a month. Otherwise the antidote will be useless. Rinpochen panicked after hearing this. He wanted to scold someone, but he didn't know who to scold. According to the Empress, this sounded like sclerosis, which was the same as Hawking's. Furthermore, the onset of the disease was more rapid and it would become like that in a short period of time. If it really became like that, he might as well die. Don't worry, there is an antidote. The Empress comforted him for the first time. If the antidote was easy to get, why would he need the Empress to bring him there personally? What was the status of the Empress? How could she easily enter the borders of Great Xia? Rinpoche used his small brain to think. This matter wasn't that simple. Your Majesty, how long have I been unconscious? Rinpoche panicked for a long time before he remembered to ask about the time. He was poisoned and not sclerosis. Since it was a poison, it should be able to be cured. It might not work here, but it might work on Earth. Of course, this was just him thinking positively. After all, it wasn't that easy to cure a poison from another world. Furthermore, the time was too short, only half a month. However, he could only think positively. 20 hours, the Empress said. The Empress had been on the road with Rinpoche for 1 day and 1 night. Rinpoche calculated the time. The last time he came back was between 11 p.m. and 1 p.m. There were still a few hours left until 2.5 days. Your Majesty, I will go back to Earth. There might be a way, Rinpoche said. The Empress looked at him and asked, how confident are you? I don't know. Rinpoche shook his head and replied bitterly. There are only 15 days left. Now there are only 14 days left. It will take 10 days to travel from Lan City to the 9 pavilions. Even though this Kirin is fast, it will still take 7.5 days. You have to go back twice. Each time it will take at most 2.5 days. Otherwise it will be too late, the Empress said seriously. Even though the Kirin was twice as fast as a fast horse could change horses at full speed. However, this Kirin needed to rest. Therefore it was only left with slightly more than 2 days. If Rinpoche went back twice for 2.5 days each time, he would still have 2.5 days to negotiate with the 9 pavilions or snatch it from them if he failed. If anything went wrong, Rinpoche would suffer a fate worse than death. Chapter 184. A day later, in a mountain forest, the Empress held Rinpoche in one hand and patted the Kirin's back with the other. Wait here, I will be back in a day. The Kirin shook its head, happily jumped over a mountain stream, turned a corner and disappeared. Even though Rinpoche had been sitting on the Kirin's back for the past 2 days, he didn't have the slightest intention of investigating the Kirin. What was the use of investigating the Kirin when he was about to lose his life? The next second, 2 figures appeared in the house on Earth. The Empress held Rinpoche with one hand. At this moment, Rinpoche could barely speak. If the Empress let go, he wouldn't even be able to stand. Where do we go to get the antidote? The Empress asked. Your Majesty, help me get my phone, Rinpoche said weakly. When he woke up, he only drank a little blood. The blood came from a small beast that the Empress caught along the way and poured into his mouth. Rinpoche was placed on the sofa by the Empress. Looking at the back view of the Empress going upstairs, his heart was filled with gratitude. Such a woman did so much for him. What else was there to say? One had to know that she was the Empress of a nation. She didn't sleep or rest for 2 days just to get the antidote for him. For this reason she even took the risk of entering deep into Great Xia alone. Rinpoche felt that if he could survive this trip, he would be willing to become enemies with the whole world for her. After a while, the Empress took Rinpoche's phone and dialed Qin Qing's number. At this time she could only look for him. I haven't seen you for a long time. You have been elusive for the past 6 months. After the call was connected, Qin Qing laughed on the other end. Come to my house, it's a matter of life and death, Rinpoche said weakly. Is it because of that woman? Qin Qing's first reaction was that something had happened to him after getting involved with that woman. I'm poisoned, come quickly, Rinpoche said while paying attention to the Empress. However, he didn't feel the coldness that he had expected. Why don't you go to the hospital? Do you need me to call the ambulance? I'll arrange a hospital for you, Qin Qing, who was on the other end of the phone, said as he hurried out of the room. I won't die from this poison for the time being, but I'm afraid that ordinary hospitals have never seen this poison before, Rinpoche replied. Of course, no one had seen this poison before. He was the most powerful person on Earth, but it was a pity that this poison was in his body. Wait, I'll be right there. Qin Qing hung up the phone, came out of the elevator and ran into the garage. He then hurriedly rushed to Rinpoche's place. Zixiao, change your clothes? Rinpoche turned his head slightly and said to the Empress. This Zixiao sounded extremely natural. Which woman was it? The Empress suddenly asked. Rinpoche almost vomited blood. She actually remembered this matter at this time? My friend saw you from afar last time and felt that your appearance and bearing were definitely not ordinary. Look, even a blind man could see this. However, he felt that your status was too high, and that it would be troublesome for me to be with you. In our world, we pay particular attention to people of equal social status. Rinpoche slowly explained. He thought to himself, Qingqing, in any case I have saved your life. After hearing this, the Empress didn't say a word. She immediately carried the bag into the house to change her clothes. The things that had disappeared during the previous transmigration did not disappear during the process of transmigration. Instead, they were all left here, tidied up by the housekeeper and placed aside. Qingqing took almost an hour to arrive. He realized that the person who opened the door was the woman in red that he met previously. Immediately he was a little surprised. He didn't expect this woman to actually be here as well. Furthermore, the previous time was quite a distance away. This time around, the distance between them was closer. That cold and imposing feeling was even more obvious. Just by standing here he could feel an enormous pressure. He couldn't help but admire Rinpoche. He was actually able to get together with such a woman. Indeed, he was extraordinary. He didn't misjudge Rinpoche back then. After the Empress moved aside, he entered the house and saw Rinpoche lying on the sofa. He went forward to look at his expression and asked, "What happened to you?" "I've been poisoned and now I can't move at all. This is a type of poison that has been extinct for a long time. There are still 13 days before it will act up. After it acts up, it will be the same as Lou Gehrig's disease. I'm afraid that going to an ordinary hospital will delay my time." Qingqing furrowed his brows and said, "Where did you come across all these strange things?" Without waiting for Rinpoche's reply, he took out his phone and made 2 calls. Following which, he said to Rinpoche, "We have our own laboratory with all kinds of equipment. First, find out the specific situation, then find a few medical experts to help you think of a solution." "All right." Rinpoche nodded his head. Qingqing helped Rinpoche up. As a result, Rinpoche's weight had increased tremendously recently, which was somewhat unexpected. He had no choice but to raise his head and look at the lady in red. "Can I trouble you to help me?" The Empress stretched out her hand and Rinpoche was already in her hands. It was so fast that Qingqing didn't even see it clearly. Rinpoche was already being carried by the lady in red with one hand. This made him even more astonished. Who exactly was this lady? Even those who practiced martial arts couldn't be this fast. Furthermore, Rinpoche himself had to expend a lot of effort to support him. In her hands he was just like a straw. Qingqing drove in front while the Empress and Rinpoche sat at the back. Along the way, Qingqing used the rearview mirror to glance at the two of them from time to time. As long as his gaze lingered on the Empress's face for more than a second, the Empress would immediately look at him coldly, making him feel extremely guilty. He hadn't felt this way for a long time. It was as if he couldn't raise his head in front of someone. This made him even more curious about the lady's identity. However, Rinpoche didn't have any intention of introducing her. The car stopped at the car park of a building. After he alighted from the car, he realized that the lady was still looking at him from inside the car. This made him extremely astonished as he didn't know what the other party wanted to do. When he went forward to open the car door, the lady pulled Rinpoche out of the car with one hand. "Is she waiting for me to open the car door?" In a split second, Qingqing immediately felt that he was the valet. His heart was in a mess. In fact, it was just that Rinpoche was the one who eagerly opened the car door every time. Up until now, the Empress still didn't know how to open the car door. This small misunderstanding made Qingqing's heart in a mess. The three of them entered the elevator. Qingqing pressed the button for the 11th floor. After alighting from the elevator, he entered a room at the side. There were a few security guards in the room. After checking Qingqing's identity, they entered another room and another elevator. There were only 2 buttons in the elevator, the 11th floor and the 23rd floor. When they came out of the elevator, it was the same room as the one on the 11th floor with a few security guards. From this, it could be seen how tight this laboratory was. Even though it had just been established not long ago and was located in a commercial building in the city center, Qingqing's father had put a lot of effort into this laboratory. After all, the influence of the black mud cream was too great. After exiting from this room, there was a room with glass partitions. Many people wearing white coats were busy working. With a rough glance, there were at least a dozen of them. "Wait here for a while, I will look for the person in charge," Qingqing said to Rinpoche. Then he hurriedly went inside. After a while he came back with a lady. Rinpoche had met the lady at Qingqing's father's place previously. Her name was Su Shan. "Let's draw blood first and see what kind of poison it is," Su Shan said as she walked. Previously, Qingqing had told her about it. Otherwise, she would have suggested to go to the hospital. following which, Su Shan's gaze swept across the Empress's face. Her eyes were filled with amazement. Even though she was a woman, she couldn't feel even the slightest bit of jealousy when she saw the Empress. First, the Empress had her blood drawn, lumbar puncture, and a series of tests. More than an hour later, in an office, Su Shan frowned as she looked at the report. According to what you said, I thought it was metal aluminum poisoning. However, it's completely different. This poison isn't the usual kind of protein or organic substances like plant toxins, fungal toxins, or bacterial toxins. Instead, it's something very strange. This poison is alive and very strange. As Su Shan spoke, she projected a few photos. Rinpoche used all his strength to lift his head and look at the photos. All he saw were many small dots. After Su Shan zoomed in on one of the photos, he could see that there were many round dots and something that looked like tiny bugs. This isn't a bacterium. From its structure, it looks like a type of bug. It's very small and is only the size of 5 red blood cells. However, this size is already their entire body. They will devour the white blood cells in your blood and then ovulate. In a very short period of time, they will hatch into even more bugs. After that, they will drill through your blood vessels and attack your neurons, Su Shan said seriously. This is something that has never appeared before. This is a new discovery and it has a great significance to the current biology. Su Shan's eyes lit up. How do we deal with them? What Rinpoche wanted to know now was how to deal with these damn things. Chapter 185. We still need to do some tests. This is a never-before-seen organism. We need to know what can work on it. Su Shan looked at Rinpoche as if she was looking at a treasure. How long has this worm been in your body? 3 days, no more than 72 hours, Rinpoche replied. You still need to do some tests to see if there are any other conditions. As Su Shan spoke, she called for someone to bring Rinpoche to do all kinds of tests. As for herself, she repeatedly read the report a few times before heading to the laboratory. What's the matter? I'm still lacking a little. After a while, Sun Qing came to her side. Although he didn't have much of an expression on his face, his tone showed that he was very unhappy. No one would be happy if they were interrupted halfway through their work. Take a look at this. A new discovery, a big discovery. Su Shan passed the report to Sun Qing and went to the microscope to look at Rinpoche's blood sample. Sun Qing read the report and the photos from the beginning to the end. His facial expression started to change and he looked surprised. What's this? Sun Qing asked anxiously. This is a new discovery. I've mentioned it just now. It was found on the body of the major shareholder of our laboratory. The formula was also provided by him. I really don't know where he found these things. Su Shan moved her gaze away from the microscope with an excited look on her face. As long as we can find a way to restrain this organism, we can at least solve a world-class terminal illness or even more. Leukemia. Sun Qing immediately said as his eyes started to shine. Nothing was more exciting than conquering a terminal illness. The World Health Organization listed motor neuron disease ALS, cancer, AIDS, leukemia, and rheumatoid arthritis as the world's 5 most difficult diseases. Leukemia referred to immature white blood cells that were released into the blood and showed abnormalities. According to the current report, this kind of worm could devour white blood cells. There were other problems. For example, white blood cells were the first line of defense against microorganisms, pathogens, and acute suppurative bacteria. They were also the main barrier. When white blood cells were reduced, the human body would be very easy to be invaded. However, this was only a small problem in conquering leukemia. Compared to curing leukemia, this was a small problem. Sun Qing walked to Su Shan's side and looked closely at the microscope. He happened to see a white blood cell being devoured. Where is he? Sun Qing asked after looking for a while. I'm doing other tests. He's really a lucky star, Su Shan said with a smile on her face. Previously, the major shareholder named Rinpoche brought back the black mud cream that shocked the entire medical world. This time he brought back these worms that lived in the blood. To the two of them he was indeed a lucky star. For the rest of the day, Rinpoche did all kinds of tests in the laboratory. The only thing that made him feel gratified was that he finally had a meal at noon. He was fed meat porridge. One had to know that the Empress hadn't stopped for the past few days and only occasionally fed him some blood. After drinking this bowl of meat porridge, Rinpoche felt a lot more alive. However, he still couldn't exert any strength. He couldn't move at all. At most, he could move his fingers and turn his head. He couldn't even lift his arms. After tossing and turning for an entire day, Rinpoche couldn't help but ask at night, "How is it? Do you have any ideas?" "We need time," Su Shan said directly. "What I lack is precisely time." Rinpoche looked straight at her and said, "Previously I had an idea. Hemodialysis is to expel the molecules that are smaller than the size of the semi-permeable membrane, leaving the red blood cells and white blood cells in the body. If we think about it the other way around, then we can expel the red blood cells, white blood cells, and large proteins from the semi-permeable membrane, leaving the R worms behind. Although this can't cure the disease, it can reduce the number of R worms. However, in this case all the equipment needs to be customized. Will take at least half a year before it can be used. Furthermore, it will cause great harm to the body. It's a pity that time is too tight," Su Shan said as she looked at Rinpoche. She had casually named this worm because it was found in Rinpoche's body. Furthermore, the first word of Rinpoche's surname was R. When Rinpoche heard the last part, he was almost angered to death. "Why did you say so much? Now, we need to see how the R worms react to various drugs and substances. This will require a certain amount of time. Now, all the spare manpower in the laboratory has already been mobilized." "How much time do you need?" Rinpoche asked with a sullen face. "Luck is very important. Perhaps we will discover an effective drug tonight. Perhaps we will need to wait until tomorrow or half a month. Just now, we have already tested some of the things that we have on hand. Currently, we have yet to see the desired results," Su Shan said helplessly. "In other words, I can only resign myself to fate, right?" Rinpoche felt depressed. After examining for so long, this was the only result. "From a certain aspect, yes. I will pass the information on this R worm to my teacher and some famous experts to see if they have any good ideas," Su Shan said again. The Empress listened from the beginning to the end. Even though she did not understand most of it, she understood one thing. That was, the other party did not have any good ideas at the moment. Everything required more time, and the only thing that was lacking now was time. Since this was the case, there was no point in saying any more. The Empress carried Rinpoche with one hand and walked out. Qin Qing frowned and hurriedly followed behind. Currently he did not know what to do. Even though Su Shan and Sun Qing were not well known in the country, they were actually quite famous internationally. Even though Qin Qing did not see Sun Qing at this moment, he knew that Sun Qing had definitely read through all the information. At this moment, it seemed that Sun Qing similarly did not have any ideas. Now, it was up to Su Shan's teacher or other experts to come up with a solution. The Empress carried Rinpoche with one hand. After entering the elevator, she saw that Rinpoche's face was not looking good. She said, "We will get the antidote." Rinpoche moved his lips. "It's too dangerous." Along the way he had inquired about the antidote. Even though the Empress did not say much, he could tell that the 9 pavilions was located in the hinterland of Great Xia. Just this point alone made it very dangerous. He still did not know that the 9 pavilions was overseen by the 5th most powerful expert in the world, Feng Sanlu. His ranking was even higher than the Empress's. If he knew, it would not be too dangerous but simply risking his life. "Is there anyone in this world who can make me stay?" The Empress's face was ice cold and her eyes were filled with disdain. Qin Qing was shocked by the Empress's tone. This woman's confidence was simply terrifying. He did not know what kind of person could say such words. Also, what she said just now was true. What did she mean? Qin Qing would never have thought that she was talking about him. Chapter 186. It was a blatant counterattack that turned the tables around. "My friends, if you have votes, please support me. Don't keep them. No matter what, I have to catch up to 6th place and keep it, right? Although others have already treated me as a salted fish should have some ideals, right? Therefore I'll post a flyer asking for votes. Asking for votes, asking for votes. Important things must be repeated 3 times. Also, the activity page of the mobile app has doubled the number of votes. Everyone, don't be afraid of trouble. Click a few more times and help me catch up." 11. Finally, I'd like to thank my friends who have always supported me, whether it's through subscriptions, gifts, monthly votes, or recommendation votes. Chapter 187. Qin Qing wanted to make arrangements for the two of them, especially for someone to take care of Rinpoche. However, Rinpoche rejected his offer. After being sent back by Qin Qing, the Empress placed Rinpoche on the sofa and sat at one side. The two of them did not speak. They sat there from evening until late at night, only eating some takeout. Zixiao, go back and rest. Ren Baqin spent the entire night sorting out his emotions. There was no point in thinking too much about this matter. He could only hope that there would be some progress on the other side, or that he could successfully obtain the antidote from Great Xia. The Empress did not reply. Instead, she switched on the television. I want to watch television, the Empress said. Ren Baqin forced a smile on his face and asked, what kind of place is the 9 pavilions? A gathering place for a bunch of lunatics, the Empress replied casually. Is it very powerful? Ren Baqin asked. No one in this world can stop me. The Empress's tone was full of confidence in herself. Even though the Empress's tone was unyielding, Ren Baqin could still sense something from her words. That's amazing. What if they don't give it to us? This emperor has spoken. If they dare to refuse, this emperor will kill them and bury them with you. This time Ren Baqin really laughed. This was indeed the Empress's usual style. Soon after, the two of them fell into silence again. Only the sound of a Qing dynasty drama on the television kept on drilling into Ren Baqin's ears. I only hope that your heart is like mine, that you will not disappoint my longing for you. Once you have crossed the ocean, it is difficult for you to be like water, it is an unforgettable madness. It is difficult to say which one is better, the moon or the stars. If you don't lower your head and cry because you have missed the moon, maybe you will see the sky full of stars. It's not inferior to the beauty of the moon. However, at this point in time, Ren Baqin was already immersed in his own thoughts. On the other hand, the Empress was watching with bright and piercing eyes. He was just an ordinary person, while Qi Zixiao was the emperor of a country. She was peerless in beauty and martial arts, but she could treat him like this. She brought him to the enemy's territory without rest for several days, facing a strong opponent and obtaining the antidote for him. Why did she do it? Was it because of all the lies he had said before? Or his value to Deo? Or was it the last one, the love she had for him? Just like by Jingjing and Joker? This was the first and third point. The first was the cause and the third was the effect. He was not blind, nor was he a fool. He could completely feel it. The second point wasn't important anymore. Just for the friendship that only existed in novels and movies, what was there to hesitate about? Was there anything he couldn't do? Hadn't he once thought that he would be willing to go against the entire world for her? Yes, even if I have to go against the whole world, I'm willing. Ren Baqin repeated his previous thoughts. What could he do in his current state? Is there anything I can help with when the time comes? Apart from asking the other party not to go to Great Xia? Ren Baqin thought about it. There seemed to be something that, even though it was very difficult to obtain, wasn't impossible. Furthermore, after obtaining it, regardless of whether the Empress was in the 9 pavilions or when she was intercepted by enemies when she left Great Xia, it would be extremely useful. Zixiao, can you bring me to the 2nd floor? I'm thinking of something that will be helpful to us, Ren Baqin said with a look of determination in his eyes. If this matter were to be exposed in the future, he would be hunted down by the entire world, so he would have to run for his life. As for his parents and family, the worst-case scenario would be to be sent to that world. What is it? The Empress turned to look at him. Her eyebrows were gentle and her eyes were bright. Nerve gas. Just 1 kilogram is enough to kill all humans and animals within a radius of 1 kilometer. Ren Baqin's gentle voice spoke of this terrifying thing. This was the determination he had just made. As long as you obtain this antidote, Zixiao, if you encounter any trouble, you can just throw it out. I'm sure the danger this time will be reduced by a lot. However, it will be somewhat difficult to obtain it. All right. The Empress didn't hesitate at all. She didn't feel that it was inappropriate for such a thing of mass destruction. She brought Ren Baqin to the computer on the 2nd floor and sat him down. Ren Baqin directed the computer to boot up. Following which, the Empress placed Ren Baqin's hands on the keyboard and held them as if she was hugging him. Ren Baqin smelled the delicate fragrance from the Empress's body and felt her hair brushing against his face. His heart was at peace. He could feel the softness and warmth of the Empress's hands. There was a smile on Ren Baqin's face. Even after this incident, he would become a global fugitive even if he neutralized the poison. The change from an ordinary person to a Kongbu member wouldn't affect his current mood. He felt warm and happy. What are you smiling at? The Empress asked coldly, but it was as if she was speaking beside Ren Baqin's ear. Such an intimate action made her ears feel a little hot. When people are happy, they will smile. As long as you are by my side, I will be happy, Ren Baqin said with a smile. What exactly do I have to do? Hurry up. The Empress's voice became even colder. The smile on Rinpoche's face became wider. However, business was more important. Rinpoche forced his fingers to move on the keyboard. Then he let the Empress help him flip the pages. First, he confirmed the two most powerful poisonous gases, VX and sarin. Sarin's lethality was ranked below VX, but it was more in line with Rinpoche's requirements. The time it took to take effect was shorter, the effect was faster, and it directly acted on the nerves. Even if it didn't poison the other party to death, it would greatly reduce the other party's strength. It was completely in line with Rinpoche's requirements. Next, he continued to search for information on sarin gas. Very quickly, Rinpoche's attention was attracted by a piece of news from a few months ago. A certain organization's biochemical weapons factory was bombed by the United States. And a few months before that, that organization had just carried out an attack with sarin gas. This news was from a few months ago, but it was very useful to Rinpoche now. This was because in the previous attack, according to the symptoms of the casualties, it could be inferred that the other party used sarin gas. Although it was bombed a few months ago, Rinpoche felt that the possibility of sarin gas was very high. After all, they didn't use much sarin gas in the previous attack. It was very likely that they kept it in their hands as a deterrent. Furthermore, the difficulty of obtaining sarin gas here was much higher than going to the United States to try his luck. Although he could find the address of some of the bases on the internet, who knew where the sarin gas was stored unless he caught some military officials? After thinking about it, Rinpoche still felt that going to that organization was better than thinking of ways to deal with the United States. Although he had already made up his mind, it wasn't that easy to hide from the surveillance and satellites in the United States. Now that he had a better option, he naturally gave up on his previous dangerous idea. As for that notorious organization, so what if they found out who did it? Zixia, we're going overseas to take a look. Maybe they have what we want, Rinpoche said as he tilted his head slightly. Okay. The Empress nodded without hesitation. The next thing to do was to find someone to apply for their passports. And their destination was Turkey. The situation in that country wasn't too stable recently. There were no domestic flights to that country. They needed to go to Turkey first and then change routes there. It was very easy to get a tourist visa for Turkey. They just had to apply online and it could be obtained in a few minutes. The only troublesome thing was the passport. Fortunately, Qin could still help with this matter. Although he didn't know why Rinpoche was still running around at this time, he already felt that he couldn't see through Rinpoche, who was originally just an ordinary person. Whether it was the things he did, the strange things, the poison, or the woman beside him. He hung up the phone. He would be able to get his passport tomorrow morning. It had to be said that it was really important to have a strong friend. Even if he couldn't do it himself, his connections were enough to help him solve some of the problems that he found very troublesome. Rinpoche calculated the time. After getting his passport tomorrow morning, he would directly go to the capital and then take a flight to Turkey. He would arrive at midnight tomorrow. Chapter 188. Late at night the next day, a man and a woman appeared at Istanbul airport. The man was carrying a bag while the woman was wearing a red dress. The woman's hand was still on the man's back, and they looked like any other traveling couple. However, upon closer inspection, the man's body was completely limp and powerless. His legs were barely moving, and his toes were about 1 centimeter off the ground. He only looked like he was walking because the woman was holding him with one hand. Naturally, it was Rinpoche and the Empress who appeared here. They didn't leave after alighting the plane. Instead, they waited for a night and took a plane to Gaziantep the next morning. This was the closest Turkish city to the area occupied by that organization. After arriving at Gaziantep, they first ate some local specialties. Naturally, it was the Empress who ate. From time to time, she would feed Rinpoche a plate of food. Even though she wasn't as gentle as an ordinary woman, this kind of treatment made Rinpoche want nothing more. After eating, they bought some things from a nearby shop. Thanks to the voice translation software, Rinpoche and the Empress, who only knew basic English, didn't find it difficult to move in this unfamiliar place. After bringing food and water, the Empress held Rinpoche's hand and chose a direction. After leaving the city, they arrived at a hidden place and began to move quickly. At this moment, the Empress was even faster than the Kirin while carrying a person. Rinpoche only felt a strong gust of wind rushing into his mouth, making him unable to open his eyes. He felt that if a rope was tied to his body he could fly like a kite. Of course, it was more likely that he would be dragged like a dead dog. After advancing at high speed for half an hour, they could already see a row of iron nets ahead. The Empress tapped her feet and directly leaped over. In the distance, a soldier inadvertently looked over and immediately rubbed his eyes in disbelief. When he opened his eyes again, that red shadow had already disappeared. Jianghu, what are you doing? Another soldier looked in the direction he was looking at. Nothing, maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me just now, the soldier called Jianghu said suspiciously. After another 10 minutes, the two of them, who had already left the border, stopped behind a mound of earth. The Empress took out her phone and pressed a few buttons, following which she brought up the GPS map. This was what Rinpoche taught her before they set off. Thanks to the current media, the area occupied by that organization could be found on the news. The organization controlled the central, eastern, and northern parts of the country. Every year, many young people from other countries would sneak into the organization from this direction after being brainwashed. After ascertaining the direction, the Empress carried Rinpoche and moved forward again. After more than an hour, both of them had already entered the territory controlled by that organization. They could already vaguely see the city in the distance. Suddenly, the Empress carried Rinpoche and hid behind a huge rock. A moment later, a few vehicles passed by on the dirt road not far in front of the two of them. There was a pickup truck in front and behind them with machine guns mounted on them. There were 5 or 6 people in camouflage uniforms, bulletproof vests, and hoods sitting in the trucks. In the middle there was a truck with many people on it. Rinpoche, who was being carried by the Empress, looked at the cars from afar and knew that they were indeed within the range of the target. Calculating the time, it was about time for the two of them to return to that world. After all, time was tight. It was best not to waste too much time this time. What's more, even if he managed to get some information now, if he couldn't retrieve it in time, it would take a long time for him to return, and he would have to search for more information again. The next time he came back, he would have at least 2.5 days, and it could even be extended depending on the situation. Furthermore, Rinpoche still had some hope for the laboratory. The next time he came back would be 5 days later in that world, which was 15 days on Earth. With such a long time, what if the laboratory had found a cure? Even though the probability wasn't high, there was always a chance. If that was the case, he wouldn't have to take the risk. At the thought of this, Rinpoche said, "Zixiao, let's go back first and come back next time." The Empress nodded and said, "Okay." Following the Empress's nod, the two of them disappeared into thin air in their attire and appeared at the place where they had left previously. The Kirin was lying on the ground with its belly facing the sky. It kept rubbing its back against the ground as if it was itching. The Kirin was taken aback by the sudden appearance of the two of them, following which it turned over, whimpered, and trotted to the side of the Empress. The Empress patted its head twice, leaped onto its back and said, "Let's go." A few days later, within the borders of Great Xia, the mountains and forests were filled with fiery red leaves. From time to time, they drifted down with the autumn wind, forming a thick layer of leaves on the ground. Rinpoche was leaning on the Kirin's back. The Kirin had nothing better to do and was biting its claws or maybe its nails. This Kirin was called Qishui. It was said that the first emperor found it beside a lake called Qishui and gave it this name. It had been in the palace of Dayo for 50 years. Even though its bloodline wasn't pure, its lifespan was far longer than that of an ordinary creature. It was said that it had at least 500 years of lifespan. At present, it could only be considered as an adult. At this moment, Rinpoche was sitting on the ground with a thick cloak wrapped around his body. This was brought back by the Empress after she went out once. Along the way, most of the time, they walked in remote places to reduce the chances of being discovered. After all, the Empress also knew the dangers of this trip. Occasionally she would go down the mountain to obtain some things. The previous time was because the temperature had plummeted after entering Dayo. The Empress went down the mountain to obtain this cloak and a bowl of porridge from an unknown place. The next time was to go down the mountain to obtain some food. After all, Rinpoche couldn't survive just by drinking some beast blood. However, his current position wasn't very comfortable. It was fine at first, but after Qishui rubbed against his body, Rinpoche was now in an awkward position. Even though he couldn't move, he could feel the soreness in his arms, shoulders, and waist. At present, he was looking forward to the Empress's return. This position was really too uncomfortable. It would be better to lie flat on the ground. A series of rustling sounds could be heard. Rinpoche immediately became alert and looked in that direction. Wild beast? Just as this thought arose in Rinpoche's mind, Two men dressed in tight-fitting clothes appeared from behind the tree. Even though their bodies were stained with grass and wood dust, looking at their clothes they weren't ordinary hunters. When he saw them they also saw him and the monster that he was leaning on. "This is a Kirin?" one of them said in surprise. "Sorry, we went the wrong way." The other person pulled him and walked backward. Rinpoche watched the two of them disappear into the forest. His heart tightened. They had been seen by others and he hoped that this news wouldn't spread. There were very few Kirins with impure blood in this world. The most well-known one was in the palace of Dayo. Unfortunately he couldn't move at all. Even if he could move he wouldn't be able to do anything to the two of them. Rinpoche had absolute confidence in his martial arts. As for Qi Shui, it didn't even look at the two of them from the moment they appeared until they left. "Qingwu, why are you pulling me?" "That's a Kirin." The two of them walked for more than 100 meters before the one who exclaimed about a Kirin shook off the other person's arm and asked, "Can we provoke someone who is with a Kirin? If they don't like us at all, we won't be able to leave the mountain alive today." "That's true. However, I didn't expect that we would see a Kirin one day. When we go back we will have something to brag about." Other than those occasional rumors, as far as I know, only the imperial family of Dayo has one. I don't know when another one appeared. Qingwu, do you think it's the one in the imperial family of Dayo?" the first man asked. "How is that possible?" The other man shook his head. "But this is a Kirin, not a cabbage. It can't just appear out of nowhere, right? Why aren't you walking?" "Wait, something isn't right." The eyes of the man called Qingwu lit up. "What's wrong?" There was something wrong with that person just now. His aura was too weak and his posture was a little awkward. Qingwu recalled the man he saw just now and said, "What do you mean?" Chapter 189. That man may be seriously injured and unable to move. "So what?" the other man asked casually. Even if that man was seriously injured, what could the two of them do? Qingwu was a skinny man of about 30 years old. The lines on his face looked like they were chiseled by knives and axes. At this moment he was hesitating. "Let's go back and take a look." After hesitating, Qingwu made up his mind. Upon hearing this, the man looked at Qingwu's expression and cried out, "Are you crazy?" Previously, Qingwu had pulled him away and now he wanted to go back. Combined with what he said about that man not being able to move, it wasn't hard to imagine what he was up to. Qingwu's eyes flickered. "I'm just going back to take a look. If that man is really seriously injured, then only the Kirin is left. Since he can be associated with a Kirin, he might have some good stuff on him like secret manuals or treasures. Don't you want them?" "You are crazy. There is still a Kirin." The other man was shocked. Qingwu had always given people the impression that he was bold but cautious, but no one expected him to be so bold. Didn't that Kirin have no reaction just now? Let's just watch from afar. What if that man is seriously injured and dies? If that's the case, we can just pick him up. That Kirin won't be guarding him forever, right? Qingwu voiced out his thoughts. "If he recovers, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape." The other man was a little worried. "Let's observe the situation first. Furthermore, if he doesn't die, we can use other methods to kill him. That is a Kirin, not a human, and it can't know everything like a human. I have an item with 3 bone-penetrating needles that can penetrate leather from 100 steps away. I'm afraid that even if that man dies, the Kirin won't know what happened," Qingwu continued. As he spoke, he took out a cylinder from his bag, waved it in front of the other man and put it back into the bag. "You actually have this thing?" The other man was surprised to see what Qingwu took out. One had to know that this cylinder was only sold at the Pavilion of 100 Machines, and it was very expensive. It could fire a total of 3 rounds of bone-penetrating needles, 3 at a time. Could be said to be silent and extremely fast. Even an expert who had just attained the Earth Wheel level would inevitably be hit by it. Bai Su gave it to me earlier. If she had used it to protect herself, I'm afraid she wouldn't have ended up like that, said Qingwu, a haze flashing across his eyes. So, if there's a chance for me to become stronger, I must seize it. Otherwise, how can I avenge Bai Su? Qingwu gritted his teeth and said. The other man could understand Qingwu's feelings. No matter who it was, if their beloved junior sister was tortured to death, the only thing left in their hearts would be revenge. It wasn't easy for Qingwu to endure until now. However, according to what Qingwu said, it was somewhat feasible. If that man had died, the Qilin would definitely not have stayed there to guard him. The two of them just had to guard that place and prevent others from stealing the peaches. If he just stood guard from afar, it shouldn't be too dangerous. Thinking of this, he also nodded. I'll go with you. But first, don't be rash. Let's observe the situation first. Jianghu revealed a trace of a smile and patted his companion's shoulder. In his heart, however, he said, I'm sorry. I haven't gotten my revenge yet, so I can't die yet. The reason why he had to convince his companions was because of that Qilin. No one knew what kind of strength this legendary species had. If there really was an accident, he would have a slight chance. After all, he ran faster than him. The two of them made up their minds and didn't rush back. Instead, they first changed direction and carefully moved towards the place they had been before. Although the two of them only took a glance and were in a hurry to leave, Jianghu noticed another distance. The trees were closer to that person, which meant that the two of them could move closer. More importantly, that person was facing in another direction. The two of them made a circle before carefully moving in that direction, trying not to make the slightest sound. When they were about to get close to the place they had been before, the two of them could see through the trees and the empty space from before. The two of them carefully looked over and saw that the Qilin and the man were there, but there was also another person beside them. It was a woman in red, wearing a somewhat strange red dress. She was squatting there and feeding something into the man's mouth. So there's a companion, the two of them thought. In the next second, the woman suddenly raised her head and looked over with a cold expression. Although they were far away, the two of them could still feel the murderous and mocking intent in her eyes. We have been discovered. Run. The two of them turned around and fled. With just a glance from the woman, the two of them felt a chill run down their spines. It was as if their bodies had been poured with ice water. They immediately knew that she was an expert, and she was probably much more skilled than their chief. The Empress put down the bowl in her hand. Her movements were neither hurried nor slow. In the next moment, she suddenly disappeared and appeared not far behind the two of them. In a flash, she appeared above the two of them and directly stepped on one of their heads. That person almost didn't have time to react and was directly stomped into the ground like a nail. Only his hair was left on the ground, and he was directly stomped to death. Jianghu was only a few meters faster than the man. When he heard the sound behind him, he turned around and saw that his fellow disciple only had his hair scattered on the ground. The woman was standing on his head and looking at him. Her face was full of heroic spirit, but it was as cold as frost. Subconsciously, he took out the cylinder. However, the combination of this frosty woman, the red dress, and the Qilin from before suddenly reminded him of that legendary figure. How could that person appear here? But other than her, who else could it be? At this moment, Jianghu's mind was blank. At this moment, his previous thoughts seemed like a joke. But why was she here? How could she be here? I can't accept this. In the next second, a stone flew out from under the woman's feet. With a piercing sound, it directly hit Jianghu's head. It pierced through the other side of Jianghu's head with fresh blood and brain matter, taking away all of his thoughts. Jianghu's body ran a step before falling to the ground. At this moment, there was only an empty hole in his face and blood splattered everywhere. Less than a minute had passed since the Empress disappeared and returned. What's wrong? Rinpoche couldn't move his body, but he could still hear the sound of something running in the forest just now. This made him subconsciously think of the two people he saw just now. Just two little bugs, the Empress said indifferently. Hearing the Empress say two, Rinpoche knew that it was most likely those two people. They actually left and came back. He reckoned that they were up to no good. They deserved to die. In fact, after the Empress returned, Rinpoche told her about the two people who came just now. Obviously, the Empress didn't care. As long as the other party didn't appear in front of her, she couldn't be bothered with them. The Empress squatted down, picked up the bowl and fed Rinpoche the remaining half of the porridge. Then, she lifted him up and placed him on the back of the Qilin before continuing on their journey. One day later, the two of them returned to Earth in a forest that was 1 day's journey away from the 9 pavilions. At this moment, Rinpoche had already been poisoned for 9.5 days. There were still 5.5 days left. When Rinpoche and the Empress appeared in the other world, both of them were stunned because there were two men wearing hoods beside them. At this moment, the middle part of the hood was pulled down to reveal their faces. They were lifting their pants and looked like they were about to go to the toilet. Chapter 190. The four of them stared at each other for a moment. Rinpoche's face was filled with confusion. Was there really such a coincidence? In the next moment, The two of them flew backward without even making a sound and remained motionless in the air. Previously, the two of them disappeared behind a huge rock near the road leading out of the city. There were still 3 cars on the road, 2 modified pickup trucks and 1 military transport vehicle. At this moment, there was a row of men wearing camouflage uniforms and headgear peeing at the roadside. Furthermore, they were laughing at the two of them for being like sissies who had to hide from people when going to the toilet. In the next moment, they saw the two of them flying backward from behind the rock. Everyone was stunned at first, following which someone shouted loudly. Everyone hurriedly pulled up their pants, took out their guns and pointed them at the rock while cursing incessantly. At this moment, the Empress's face was as cold as ice. Actually, she didn't know what the two of them were going to do. After all, no one dared to do such a thing in front of her. It was just that the moment she came out, she met the two of them. Her mood immediately turned sour and her face was filled with unhappiness. Listening to the clamor outside in a language that she didn't understand, she carried Rinpoche with one hand and turned out of the rock. There were more than 20 people opposite them with their guns aimed at them and shouting in a language that neither of them understood. Perhaps they felt that it was unnecessary. No one went to operate the squad machine gun on the pickup truck. After all, there were only 2 of them. The 2 of them were less than 20 meters away from the roadside. At this moment, both parties could almost see each other's faces. In an instant, the Empress disappeared from her original position. Before anyone could react, she had already appeared above the head of the person in front and stomped down. However, unlike the previous person who was nailed into the ground like a nail, the Empress stomped his entire head into his chest. Using the force of this stomp, she stomped on another person's head as if she was stepping on a human head. In just 2 seconds, a total of 9 people fell to the ground after their bodies became shorter. Their bones were protruding from their backs. Those people only saw a red figure carrying another person and shuttling through the crowd at a speed that they couldn't react to. One by one, the living people fell to the ground with the sound of their bones breaking. Immediately, fear rose in their hearts. They screamed and raised their guns to shoot randomly in the air. Their guns simply couldn't keep up with the Empress's figure. But in the next second, the red shadow fell into the crowd like a ghost and kept shuttling back and forth, sending people flying. From the beginning to the end, everyone could only see 2 shadows flying up and down. The battle lasted for less than 10 seconds. All the gunfire stopped abruptly. When the Empress stopped, she was surrounded by corpses. Half of them had their bones shattered and their internal organs ruptured. Half of them had their heads in their chests and their spines protruded from their backs. Rinpoche had truly experienced a hail of bullets, but not a single bullet was able to graze him. In that kind of situation just now, he didn't feel the slightest bit of unease. He firmly believed in the Empress's strength. There might be someone else in the car, Rinpoche reminded. As soon as Rinpoche finished speaking, the doors of the 2 cars opened. Da-da-da. A gunshot followed the opening of the car door. There was a total of 3 people. Their faces were full of fear as if they had seen the devil. They shouted and hooked their fingers on the trigger. The Empress carried Rinpoche and moved horizontally for 2 to 3 meters. Then she leaped up and stepped on the head of one person followed by the other. Now, there was only one person hiding behind the car door with a fearful look on his face as he turned his gun. The Empress suddenly stretched out her hand and waved it in the air a few times. There were already a few bullets in her hand. Then, with a wave of her hand, a few holes immediately appeared in the car's window. That person was still hooking the trigger and shouting crazily. He didn't even realize that there were no more bullets in his gun. At the same time, liquid flowed down his pants. That person still felt that he was in a dream. He must be in a dream. Otherwise, how could such a thing happen in this world? If he was in a dream, then it could be explained. These 2 people must be demons. It was a dream to make him submit. The Empress's movements were too fast. Rinpoche and that person didn't realize that the Empress had actually caught a few bullets and threw them back. Furthermore, she threw them askew. She threw them askew. She threw them askew. With a cold look on her face, the Empress instantly appeared in front of the open car door and gave it a kick. Boom. The car door was deformed and twisted. Then, with a huge force, it crashed into the person behind. That person's legs and head, which were over the height of the car door, remained in place. His body was spurting blood as he crashed into the car and flew out along with the other car door. Only then did the Empress carry Rinpoche and leave quickly with a gloomy face. Rinpoche was a little speechless. The last person died a little too tragically. The Empress purposely chose a place to avoid people. Not long after, they arrived near the city that they had seen before. At this moment, the two of them only realized the problem with this city when they got closer. It didn't look like the flourishing buildings of China at all. Close to the two of them was a stretch of single-story houses with broken walls. Many of the buildings were dilapidated and only one or two walls were still standing. There were bullet holes and traces of explosions everywhere. There were also some buildings in the distance, but they couldn't be seen very clearly. At present, what the two of them saw was a stretch of ruins that was filled with a heavy aura of death. However, they still had to go to the city to find out the specifics. The Empress carried Rinpoche and leaped up and landed on the roof of a house. Occasionally, she would stop on some of the taller buildings and look for the direction to go. At this moment, the two of them realized that there were still many people in the city. Most of them were soldiers who wore camouflage and headgear. There were also a small number of civilians. Some of them wandered on the streets and hurriedly avoided the soldiers when they saw them. There were also a few people who gathered together and shouted in a language that they couldn't understand. There were also some youths who waved their arms fanatically when they saw those soldiers. The two of them stopped on the roof of a nearby building. The Empress said, "What do we do next?" "Catch someone to talk to and come back. I reckon that the thing we want isn't here. Ask them where the most important city is and where the leader is. It's best to find those soldiers who look different from the majority. As far as I know, there are many brainwashed youths who came from other places. They might not be that fanatical and it's easier for them to get the information we want to know," Rinpoche said. "Just leave me here. There shouldn't be any danger." The Empress nodded her head. She placed Rinpoche against the wall and leaped down from the roof. "Nasha, coming here is the right choice." Two Caucasian girls in military uniforms were smoking in a shady place. "Yes, I like it here. I'm fighting with everyone for a noble goal. It's so much better than the boring days in the past. This place has allowed me to know the meaning of living," the other girl with freckles said with a smile. Both of them were around 20 years old. They gave up their comfortable and peaceful lives and secretly left their homes to come here. It had already been half a year since then and they had already started to get used to life here. Here both of them had found what they wanted. Even if they were to die in battle here, it would be for the sake of a noble goal. Therefore they weren't afraid of death. At this moment, a person appeared in front of them. It was a stunning lady wearing a red dress. She didn't look like someone who should be here at all. Instead, she looked like someone who should appear on television or at banquets. However, the two of them weren't concerned about this. Instead, they were concerned about how this person appeared. No matter who it was, they would be shocked when someone suddenly appeared in front of them out of thin air. Their heartbeat would accelerate. It was the same for the two of them. At the same time, they opened their mouths wide and wanted to scream. The Empress slapped one of them on the forehead. The back of his head hit the wall heavily and blood splattered everywhere. At the same time, she grabbed the other person by the neck and disappeared. After a while, someone found a female soldier lying on the ground. Her eyes were wide open. She had long lost her breath. Immediately, someone shouted a warning. Chapter 192. Nasha used to think that she had lofty ideals. In order to protect absolute justice, she came here from her hometown and was prepared. However, at this moment she was trembling. It wasn't only because of the pain in her left arm, but also because of the fear in her heart. At this moment there were two people in front of her. One was a man leaning against the corner of the wall, and the other was the woman who looked stunning at first glance. After being brought here in an unimaginable way and having one of her arms broken, her heart was filled with fear. If they were soldiers from the government, she probably wouldn't be like this. However, that woman in red was actually able to carry her and leap 7 to 8 meters high. Her speed was as fast as lightning. This made her extremely afraid. She wasn't human at all. She was a devil in human skin. Rinpoche had a kind smile on his face and said in a gentle voice, "Be good and tell us what we want to know. Then you won't have to suffer like this anymore. What we want to know is very simple. Even if you don't say it, others will say it. Why must you stubbornly make things difficult for yourself?" The voice translation software on the Empress's phone translated Rinpoche's words. Fortunately, he brought a solar charger with him the last time he set off. When he was in the other world, he hung the charger outside his backpack so that he could charge his phone. Nasha understood the man's words. After hesitating for 10 seconds, she felt a sharp pain in her right arm. The pain of her broken bones made her see black. Then that hand moved to her neck. If you don't say it, we can only look for the next person. This isn't difficult for us. There will always be someone who will say it. Rinpoche continued to speak gently. Nasha's heart was filled with fear. She cried hysterically, "What do you want to ask? I will tell you everything. Let me go, please let me go." No matter what, she was only a young woman in her 20s. Even though she came here with good intentions and had undergone preliminary training, she was still a young woman who hadn't experienced much. "Okay, that's good. Speak slowly," Rinpoche said softly. Following which, he got to know some of the things he wanted to know during the question and answer session. In fact, this girl didn't know much. It was impossible for her to know too many things, such as where the sarin gas was or where the leader of the organization was. However, this gave Rinpoche a sense of direction. He knew the location of the so-called capital of this organization. It was about a day's journey from here. With the Empress's speed, it would take her at most half a day. The higher-ups of the organization must be there. Even the head of the organization must be there. Perhaps he could get what he wanted. After knowing what he wanted, Rinpoche felt a little regretful and said gently, "It's good to have ideals, but it's a pity that this world is very cruel." He looked up at the Empress and said, "Send her on her way." Before Nasha could react, the Empress placed a finger on her forehead and threw her corpse to the ground. Then she picked up Rinpoche and left quickly. Occasionally, someone would see a red shadow flash through the window, or they would see something jump between two buildings when they looked up. When they tried to look for it again, it was already gone. The scene just now was like an illusion. After leaving this place, Rinpoche gave Qingqing a call to inquire about the progress of the laboratory. It would be best if they could find the antidote. Unfortunately, even though Su Shan had sought help from her teacher, the progress was still unsatisfactory. Rinpoche hung up the phone. It seemed like he had to continue down this path. After the two of them left, even though the entire city's army searched wantonly, they couldn't find anything. They only found the corpse on the rooftop more than an hour later. At that time, the two of them were already very far away from the city. Not long after, the convoy outside the city was also discovered. Everyone who saw it was shocked by the scene. 20 to 30 people were lying on the ground in a disorderly manner. Half of them had their heads in their chests and their spines protruded out from their backs. Everyone had no idea how this was done. On the other hand, everyone found some traces on the bodies of some people. Shoe prints. Those people who were still in good condition had a shoe print on their bodies. These people were kicked to death by someone? How could this be possible? So many people didn't even have the ability to resist? Even though there were some bullet marks in the surroundings, there weren't any bullet holes on the bodies of the deceased. There were only two ways to die. The first way was that their heads were in their chests as if they were smashed by someone. The second way was that their internal organs were smashed and there was a shoe print on their bodies. Furthermore, the shoe print wasn't big and seemed to belong to a woman. Lastly, there was one person who was different from the rest. His head and legs were outside the completely deformed right car door. His body and the left car door were not far away. This method of death was completely incomprehensible to everyone. Finally, someone speculated that this person was standing behind the car door. The car door was smashed back by a huge force, which could be seen from the degree of deformation of the car door. After the car door smashed onto the person's body, due to the huge force and the fact that the person was standing behind the car door, the part of his body that was outside the car door was crushed by the car door roof and bottom. His body flew out along with the other car door. Judging from the scene, this seemed to be the only plausible scenario, but it was also the most impossible. In any case, dozens of people died in a convoy. It seemed like the murderer only had 2 or 3 people, yet he was able to kill them all empty-handed. This was what the scene conveyed to everyone. Everyone was puzzled and panicked because this was impossible. Even the best soldier couldn't do this. Half a day later, the Empress brought Rinpoche to the outskirts of another city. This was LK City, the capital of that organization. Even though it was also very run down, it was much more prosperous. There were also more cars coming and going. It took them some time to enter the city. Their hiding place was still on the rooftop. After all, the Empress's skills allowed her to walk in the forest of tall buildings as if she was walking on flat ground. It was also not that easy to be discovered. Both of them stood behind the parapet of a building and looked down. There were many people here, unlike the previous city that was in ruins. Other than the streets full of soldiers and very few civilians, it was like a normal city. The only difference between this city and other cities was that the air was filled with fanaticism. Zixiao, be careful, it's very dangerous here. Even though some people with guns can't cause any harm to you, if it's an army, it will still be dangerous for you. The weapons in this world aren't those that you see. There are also cannons, bombs, and other weapons that are very destructive. We are not here to do anything, we just want to obtain some things, Rinpoche exhorted. Even though he knew that this city shouldn't be a threat to the Empress, she still had too little understanding of the weapons in this world. Rinpoche didn't want her to get hurt because of her carelessness. At this time, the sky had already started to darken. The Empress gave Rinpoche some water, hit him, and disappeared into the night. 3 hours later, there were already 5 corpses not far away from Rinpoche. The Empress's operation was very smooth. She specifically picked the people who seemed to have a high status in the big house to capture. Among these 5 people, 2 of them were officials of this city. However, they didn't give Rinpoche the information that he wanted. Listening to the clamor from afar and the sound of the vehicles moving in the city, Rinpoche felt that someone might have already discovered that something was wrong. After all, capturing 5 people wasn't like capturing 5 chickens. It wasn't time to rest yet, and they weren't necessarily alone. In that case, the corpses of the people who had been disposed of should have been discovered. Rinpoche thought that since the Empress was back, she would probably be preparing to change her location. Before Rinpoche could wait for the Empress, a group of fully armed soldiers rushed up the building. They kicked open the rooftop door and dispersed. Very quickly, they discovered the corpses that weren't deliberately hidden and Rinpoche, who was hiding in a corner. When he heard the sound of the rooftop door being kicked open and the hurried footsteps, Rinpoche closed his eyes and tilted his head, pretending to be unconscious. At the same time, he shouted in his heart, "Your Majesty, if you don't come back soon, you won't be able to see me again." Pretending to be unconscious was indeed the most suitable action that he could do now. Even though his clothes and appearance were different from the ones here, and a few muzzles were immediately aimed at him, pretending to be unconscious could more or less buy him some time and reduce the number of beatings. Chapter 193. A few soldiers pointed their guns at Rinpoche. Then one of them came to the back and said something to them. Then he said something into the walkie-talkie. One of the soldiers quickly came to Rinpoche and poked him with his gun. Seeing that Rinpoche didn't respond, he gestured to the back. After being poked by the gun, Rinpoche could barely keep his body still. To be honest, pretending to be unconscious wasn't an easy thing to do, especially under such circumstances where he couldn't move or open his eyes to look at his surroundings. He had no idea what was going on outside and could only pray that the Empress would come back soon. Otherwise, if something happened, he would be wronged. At this moment, there were 5 to 6 guns pointed at Rinpoche on the rooftop. A few of them were checking the corpses while the rest of the people came over after searching the area. 2 of them had already picked Rinpoche up and were ready to drag him back for interrogation. At this moment, a red figure carrying a person appeared in a corner. After seeing the soldiers on the rooftop, she was immediately alarmed. Could that person be in trouble? At the thought of this, she panicked a little. Without any time to think, she appeared outside the crowd in a flash. Before the 4 soldiers with guns could react, they were hit by a strong force. The moment they were hit, their bones were shattered and their internal organs were smashed. Without any sound, they were sent flying from the rooftop. Although the sound of flesh being hit could be heard and the guns falling to the ground, a few more people were sent flying before that happened. Even though the remaining people realized something was wrong, by the time they turned around, half of them had already turned into corpses. When the people on the rooftop saw the corpses falling from the sky like dumplings, they immediately cried out in alarm. When the person in the Empress's hands saw the soldiers on the rooftop, he was pleasantly surprised. However, after the Empress's ghost-like figure shuttled through the crowd, that person swayed for a while and saw his surroundings clearly. The soldiers on the rooftop were all gone. This caused him to widen his eyes and open his mouth wide, but he couldn't say anything. "I'm late," the Empress said while holding Rinpoche with one hand. Her tone carried a tinge of guilt and concern. Rinpoche opened his eyes and looked at the Empress. He smiled and said, "You're not late, you're just in time." When he heard a few short panicked sounds just now, he calmed down. When the 2 people beside him suddenly let go of him and let him fall to the ground, he didn't panic at all. In fact, he was really fine. Fortunately, the Empress came back quickly. Those people wanted to bring him back and didn't do anything to him. However, he still praised himself for being smart and quick-witted just now. Let's change places, we've been discovered, Rinpoche said. After Rinpoche said this, the Empress carried Rinpoche and the man she caught and left quickly. Within a short period of time, they arrived at a secluded corner at the edge of the city. The Empress put Rinpoche down. The person she was strangling with her other hand had almost stopped breathing. After she released her hand, he lay on the ground and kept coughing. Rinpoche looked at this person's face with delight. And suddenly he remembered. Rin of the people. If it was that person, then the Empress had really made a great contribution this time. At the very least, the world should award her a Nobel Peace Prize. Rin. Chen Rin, Li Huff. Rinpoche used his finger that could still move to search on the screen. Very quickly, a picture of a person giving a speech appeared. Rinpoche laughed when he saw the bearded man in a black robe, black hat, and black beard gasping for breath on the ground. He didn't know what to say. Was it the will of the heavens or was he just too lucky? Inexplicably, he thought of the saying that fortune and misfortune depend on each other. How did you catch him? Rinpoche smiled and looked at the Empress. His voice was cheerful. I saw a lot of people surrounding him as he walked out of a house. If I could move at this moment, I would definitely give you a thumbs up. You did a great job, Rinpoche said happily. When the Empress heard his praise, she didn't express any opinion but felt a little happy in her heart. BGD, right? Rinpoche was all smiles as he looked at the man in the black robe. That man trembled when he heard the voice. He looked at the Empress with fear. In just a short period of time, he had already witnessed the strength of this woman. It wasn't something that a human could possess. He even suspected that the gods were here to punish them. Who are you? BGD forced himself to calm down and asked in English. However, he was barely able to calm down. After hearing his question, Rinpoche asked the Empress to turn on the voice translation and said, You don't need to know who we are. We only want one thing, sarin gas. Do you have it? What do you want? It has nothing to do with you. Let's go after we get the sarin gas and the antidote. Otherwise you will die. That thing is of no value to you if you don't use it. Furthermore, you can get it from other sources. I think it's not as important as your life. Also, I can assure you that I won't use that thing on you, Rinpoche added after thinking for a while. I don't know who you are, how can I trust you? BGD's eyes were filled with doubt. After saying a few words, he calmed down a lot. As long as they could talk, there would be a chance. After all, as the leader of such an organization, he wasn't someone who would be easily frightened. Even though it's very old-fashioned, I have to say that you have no choice. After killing you, we can continue our search. You have seen her skills, no one can stop her, not even your army. If you die because of this, it won't be of any value. Furthermore, I'm afraid that your ideals will be dragged into an internal power struggle because of your death. You should know this better than me. Rinpoche threatened and tempted. He believed that the sarin gas wasn't as important as his life to BGD. Given BGD's status, he wouldn't care where the sarin gas ended up. I can promise you, but you have to promise me that you won't hurt me. Just like what Rinpoche thought, BGD didn't care about the sarin gas at all. Deal. So, where do you keep the sarin gas? Rinpoche laughed. It's in the underground base. It's very dangerous, you can follow me to get it. BGD's eyes flickered. Rinpoche looked at him and said word by word, I think you are lying to us. Perhaps you should know what kind of treatment you will receive if you don't behave. In the next second, BGD hugged his leg and screamed in pain. His calf was broken from the stomp. This time, I'm just reminding you not to do anything stupid. You have to remember that you have thousands of lives under your command. It's not worth it if you lose your life for something as insignificant as sarin gas. I know what I should do. You don't have to do this, I'm not lying to you. BGD's face was full of pain and he was sweating profusely. I just don't want you to do anything stupid. You have to know that you can continue to be your leader after we leave. Otherwise you will become a corpse, Rinpoche repeated. Actually, he wasn't as confident as he appeared. After all, BGD was a person who had thousands of soldiers under his command and controlled the lives of many people. He didn't understand BGD and had no experience in dealing with him. He could only bare his fangs to scare BGD and make him behave. After that, the Empress carried BGD in his backpack and left. Rinpoche was still hiding in a corner and waiting quietly. There were many vehicles and people shouting around him. It seemed like a large number of troops were searching for something in the city. He knew that this was an inevitable reaction after BGD went missing. His current location should be relatively safe and they wouldn't be able to find him in a short period of time. Half an hour later, the Empress suddenly landed on top of him. The backpack in her hand was already bulging and it was filled with items. In her other hand, she was carrying a black cloth bag that looked like the BGD's robe that she had tied up. "Is this it?" the Empress asked as she took out a black bottle that was the size of a can. Looking at the size of the bottle and the bulging of the backpack, there were at least 20 to 30 bottles in it. The black cloth bag also contained about the same amount of bottles. "Try it and you will know," Rinpoche said. He felt that he was becoming more and more indifferent and didn't care about human lives anymore. A moment later, a group of armed soldiers was looking for something on the street. Suddenly, a bottle flew out of the darkness and landed at their feet. Everyone immediately raised their guns and searched around while shouting and cursing. In less than a minute, a few people at the spot where the bottle landed fell to the ground with their hands covering their necks. In less than 3 minutes, all of them collapsed. Rinpoche, who was far away, disappeared into the night after witnessing this scene. "That person is still alive? Since I said that I would spare his life, I naturally won't go back on my words," the Empress said. She didn't want to do such a thing. Rinpoche nodded his head. He didn't object to the Empress's actions. The world was so big, how could BGD find him? Chapter 194. Both of them thought that after they left, there would definitely be a huge wave of searches and a huge storm. In fact, there wasn't any. After BGD was brought back, he suppressed this matter. Previously, when he heard the news of a convoy being wiped out in another city, he immediately knew who the culprit was. He couldn't imagine that a human could actually reach such a level, but he saw it with his own eyes. Therefore, after some consideration, he suppressed this matter. On one hand, it would cause panic. On the other hand, it would affect his position. On the other hand, he was afraid of retaliation. However, after experiencing this incident, he became even more devout in his beliefs. Since such a powerful human was hidden in this world, the existence of God was inevitable. The two of them didn't know what would happen to BGD after they left and couldn't be bothered to care. Before daybreak, they crossed the border of Turkey and returned to Gaziantep. They found a random rooftop and stayed there. The nights here weren't cold. Although he didn't know the specifics, Rinpoche felt that even the Empress should be tired by now. Both bags were placed at one side. Rinpoche leaned against the corner of the wall. From here, he could see the Empress standing on the rooftop, overlooking the dark city and the occasional bright light. The night wind blew her hair and skirt up. Rinpoche liked watching the Empress like this more and more. Even if he could only see her back view, even if she couldn't move, he still felt happy. All the way until daybreak, the two of them went down to have breakfast. After that, they brought back some soft packaging film and carefully wrapped the bottles one by one. Although they had obtained the custom-made antidote made from nightshade and diphosphoryl, there was still a certain degree of danger if they were to use it after being poisoned. After all, the antidote needed time to take effect. Looking at the Empress who was wrapping the bottles with the soft packaging film, Rinpoche felt that the Empress might have done a lot of things that she had never done in her entire life. For example, taking care of people, feeding people, and doing such chores. These were things that the Empress would never experience. Now, she did all these things without any complaints. The cold expression on her face was just her character. "The dress is dirty," Rinpoche suddenly said. Rinpoche suddenly opened his mouth and said, "The Empress's dress was indeed a little dirty. These few days she had been wearing the dress that he bought for her at HN. After so many days of running around, even if she was very careful, her red dress would still have some dust on it. There were also stains on the hem of her dress and a few other places." Upon hearing this, the Empress didn't pay any attention to him. She merely brushed the dirty corner of her skirt to the back. Although it couldn't be seen anymore, there was still some dust on her body. Rinpoche laughed after seeing her actions, which made her somewhat annoyed. "After I recover, I will go buy a dress with you," Rinpoche continued to speak gently. Unlike when he was talking to Nasha, Rinpoche wasn't gentle on the surface but cold on the inside, which made the Empress dislike him. Instead, he was full of sincerity and intimacy. "All right," the Empress replied without raising her head. 2.5 days later, the two of them directly returned to the other world. At this moment, there were still 3 days left before the 15th day. When the two of them were only an hour away from the 9 pavilions, the Empress stopped Qi Shui at the top of a mountain. She placed Rinpoche aside and went into the forest in a flash. After a while, she returned to her white inner garment and red muslin skirt. With her status, she couldn't possibly let others look down on her dirty appearance. Wait for me here, I will be back in a while. The Empress carried the black bag in her hands. She had some understanding of the might of this thing, and this bag should be enough. I actually want to see what kind of expression those people will have when they see you. I want to see the heroic bearing of a top-notch expert. I believe that will definitely be the most moving scene in this world, a scene that will be engraved in my heart for the rest of my life. However, I still won't be a burden to you now, Rinpoche said with a smile. A faint smile appeared on the Empress's face. It was very faint but very beautiful. It was a scene that not many people in this world could see. I will be back in a while. Qi Shui, protect him. If you really can't do it, it is still your own safety that is more important. Don't be too stubborn. You are much more important than me, maybe even 100 times more important. I don't want to see you get hurt. Rinpoche solemnly said what he had always wanted to say, even though he clearly knew what would await him if that happened. This was the most sincere sentence he had ever said in his entire life. No one can stop me. The Empress looked at him with bright eyes and said. She patted Qi Shui's head, and in a flash she leaped down from the mountain peak. That indomitable figure remained on Rinpoche's retina, deeply imprinted in his mind, and occupied everything. The 9 pavilions had already been famous since the founding of Great Xia, and it had been at least 400 years since then. If one were to mention the 9 pavilions, other than their crazy style, there would be many experts. It wasn't far from the truth to say that experts were like carps crossing the river. The 9 pavilions had a great reputation. In the past few hundred years, there were at least 4 people who ranked among the top 10 experts in the world. Just this point alone made people not dare to look down on them. However, the 9 pavilions was so big, and there weren't many people who truly understood them. After all, most people didn't like to deal with that bunch of lunatics. The 9 pavilions was located in a kernel. It would be more appropriate to say that it was a very large village. The entire village had at least 1,000 households, and they were distributed throughout the kernel. Everything in the village was in good order. The disciples of the 9 pavilions, who were regarded as vicious by outsiders, were like ordinary people in this village, chatting and laughing. In the village there were people who sold meat, fruits, rice, noodles, salt and iron. It was no different from any other village in this world. The only difference was the 9 tall pagodas located at the back of the village, which attracted some people's attention. Many people would subconsciously glance at the pagodas while walking with respectful expressions on their faces. If an outsider were to see this situation, his or her jaw would drop. They really couldn't figure out how this bunch of lunatics who called you brothers a moment ago and then killed your entire family the next moment, could live like ordinary people in this village. It was even more unimaginable that this bunch of 9 pavilions disciples, who were feared everywhere, could actually live like a group of villagers. There were no guards in the 9 pavilions. After all, many of the people here could be considered experts in their own right. There were at least 100 earth-wheel experts and countless man-wheel experts. If a stone was thrown out, it might even hit an earth-wheel expert who looked like an old farmer. No one dared to behave atrociously in such a place, not even the people from the 9 pavilions. However, today there was someone who dared to behave atrociously here. There was a gate archway at the entrance of the village that was about 4 to 5 meters tall. After hundreds of years of wind and rain, this archway was already modeled. On the archway there were 3 big words, 9 pavilions, written with an iron brush and silver hook. The words revealed a trace of saber intent. It was said that these words were left behind by the chief pavilion master who established the 9 pavilions. The words contained his understanding of saber techniques. Therefore, there were often people observing and practicing under this archway. At this moment it was the same. A total of 20 to 30 people were sitting 10 meters away from the archway and looking up. Each of them had a look of concentration on their faces. At this moment, a lady dressed in red carrying a strange backpack suddenly appeared on the archway. She stepped on the archway and overlooked the entire village. Hua Sanlu, come out. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.